which is 2 p.m. and still a couple of minutes away. But we've had the odd challenge with the combination of microphones and information technology. So before formally starting the session and having had some work done to the microphones and also having just reinstalled my little secure wireless network, I did just want to make sure that we have a sound system that's operational. It sounds okay. Could I ask one or two of you just around the bottom of the bench just to put your microphones on briefly? Maybe the Civic Society and CPRE wouldn't mind being guinea pigs.
Testing.
That sounds fine.
1, 2, 3, 4.
There's a new career for you in road management. Excellent. Good. I believe we have an operating system again. Now then, by my computer at least, it is now 2 p.m, so it's time to make a start. There are a considerable number of fresh faces both at the table and in the public chairs to the rear of the room, so I think it's appropriate to have full reintroductions of everybody. My name is Ryn Smith. I have been appointed on behalf of the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government to examine the Tunbridge Wells site allocation local plan. Sitting at the rear of the room, I believe, here she is, Lynette Duncan, who most of you I'm sure will have corresponded with, if not spoken to in person, who is the Programme Officer for the examination. And if you have got any issues or questions about the management of the hearing process and the exchanging of documentation, she is the person to speak to during the break or after this afternoon's session. I will introduce the Council and the other persons who are present here after some initial observations about the venue and hearing arrangements for this afternoon. We're sitting here this afternoon and on Wednesday morning. Wednesday afternoon has been reserved for site inspections in the Crane Valley, and then on Thursday, the remaining session this week will transfer across the corridor into the council chamber, where I would emphasise we'll be making a start at 9:30 in the morning, not the normal 10 o'clock. So if anybody is interested in the Thursday sessions, you need to be here a little earlier. In terms of the operation of this room and the venue, toilets if they are required. Ladies' toilets, if you turn left, move along the corridor, and then turn right into the arch leading towards the council chamber, there is a ladies' cloakroom on the left-hand side of that arch, and that is where the nearest ladies' toilet to this room is found. Gents' toilet, the nearest, is literally directly across the corridor from the central door from this room. I have checked and there are no fire drills programmed for this afternoon, and so that means that if the bells do sound, it's the real thing and we have to leave. If we have to leave, the nearest means of escape out through any of these doors to my right, turn right, move to the far end of the corridor. There is a blank door marked as a fire escape with a panic bar on it. Press that bar, it will lead you into a stairwell that will take you down 3 floors and out to Civic Way. The council staff who are here in those circumstances will act as marshals and make sure that you find your way to a muster point. I've already remarked about the microphones. Troublesome though they have been, they're also extremely useful, because if you've been looking at the website for this examination, you will have found that on the days when they do work, we end up, without needing any transcripts, with a complete digital audio file of everything that is said and done in this room. I think it's worth making that point in case there's anybody who's not used to being recorded when they appear at an examination, because it is by no means universal practice yet, although I suspect it's going to become so in the relatively near future. It is important, however, when you start to speak, that you make sure that the red light on the microphone closest to you is on, And you'll also notice that I'm relatively close to my microphone. They don't have a very good range, and so it's important that you speak clearly and close to the microphone, and if you need to move it in order to speak, you can. I will also draw attention to the fact that I don't have the normal raft of inspectors' documents behind me, and that's because I'm referring to the online examination library using my laptop, which I have on my desk in front of me. So, ladies and gentlemen, hopefully I can give you the confidence that I am referring to background documents with the same assiduousness that you will have seen from inspectors in the past referring to paper, but now it's all here. Now, the arrangements for these hearings are set out in a combination of a version 4 programme and revised agendas that were issued on the 23rd of November. Does everybody who needs to have sight of those two quite important documents that say who should be here and what they should be talking about? Good, that's excellent. Now, we've been hearing up until this point in the examination essentially strategic matters, matters that bear on the relationship between this plan that I'm currently examining and the adopted core strategy that the Council already has and that this plan seeks to implement, taking account of national policy and guidance. And those are discussions that necessarily have looked at questions of principle that are relevant to more than one policy, proposal or place. But from now on, this is the watershed in the examination, from now on we're moving into a new part of the examination where we will be looking at individual policies and proposals place by place. So we will have very strongly a settlement focus, and we will quite obviously be starting with Royal, Tunbridge Wells and Southborough. I will, however, just flag up that we haven't quite finished the strategic matters. There is a remaining strategic conversation that needs to be had in relation to land supply for residential institutions, what is known in planning jargon as C2 use, reserved from Matter A, Issues 2 and 3, and that remains to be heard on the 9th of December. That's next week. We'll break this afternoon at approximately 3:30 p.m. For about 15 minutes. We'll break again at 5 p.m. for about 25-30 minutes. I have allowed for this session to run, if needs be, as late as 7:30 p.m. Now, I'm not telling everybody here that we have to be here for that long if you do not wish to be. It may well be that we wrap up the discussion earlier than that. However, I was very conscious when I made an amendment to the agenda to enable housing matters to be discussed this morning that were of a general nature and didn't bear on Royal Tunbridge Wells, that I was taking time away from Royal Tunbridge Wells. And so I thought, of absolute fairness, I had to give the same amount of time back into the agenda for this afternoon, so that if the conversation did need to extend to the original full day, then the equivalent of a full hearing day in time terms would be available to you. So we aim to conclude no later than 7:30. However, as I've said, if we finish earlier than that, then we will depart at the time when we finish. Now then, again, noting that there are a number of people here who have not been to this examination before, I will make some remarks about how the business will proceed. The examination is of the Council's plan, so inevitably I will invite the Council to speak on every matter and every issue in the agenda. I will ask individual representors, people who have made representations to the plan, to speak only on the individual matters that they have requested to be heard in respect of. And the version 4 programme is the document that records all the requests to be heard from other representors next to the matters where the discussion is most relevant to the matters that have been raised in submissions. Only representors who've requested to be heard are entitled to speak. And those people, through the diligent work of the programme officer, should now all be seated at this front table. Is there anybody sitting at the back of the room who believes that they should be speaking this afternoon, but hasn't yet found their way to a bench at the front table? That's very good news. The papers that have been provided in advance, and I would like to say a very big thank you to everybody who's been working very hard to deliver those to me, are taken as read. I've read them, and I trust everybody sitting around the table has also read them. And they don't need to be presented. The nature of the discussion is that we move directly to the key points that arise from the papers, and noting that there are a combination of people with different views, it's also your opportunity to highlight the issues that emerge from consideration not just of your position and your paper, but maybe the position of others who are also interested in the matters before us this afternoon, taking the council's and other representatives' positions into account. I normally start the discussion of a matter by seeking involvements from the representatives, i.e. not the council, before moving to the council for responses. This allows the council the opportunity to make its concluding remarks following on from the conversation and the observations that have been made by representatives. Now, occasionally it may be that once the council's remarks have been made, new avenues are opened up. And if new avenues are opened up, then on a limited basis I will allow a further round of discussion to take place. But in general terms, if we're able to finish the discussion of a matter with one round of contributions from representatives followed by a contribution from the council and conclusions from the council, that will normally be sufficient. Now down to the detail. How do you actually get involved in the discussion? How do you get involved in the conversation? As we start a matter, I will raise the matter from the agenda in agenda order, and I will ask everybody who wishes to speak on that matter to make an indication to me in a way that has become quite traditional in planning examinations over many, many years, and that is the Toblerone with your name on it in front of you can be raised on its end, and that gives me a very simple graphic signal that you want to speak on the matter. When you have spoken and you believe you've concluded, return it to its normal position. And by so doing, you're again sending me a signal that your interest has been dealt with, and I will move on from you to the next speaker in line. If it turns out that you need to come in on a later point after you've already spoken because somebody raises something that's relevant to your views, just raise your Toblerone again. I won't bring you in straight away necessarily because I will allow the conversation to take its natural flow, but at a relevant break point, anybody with a raised Toblerone, I will return to them and ask them for their contribution again. And if you are coming in for a second time, you don't need to reiterate anything that anybody else has previously said. It may be sufficient, if you're just wishing to say, I support what so-and-so said, to say that, and then we can move on. Okay, I think that takes me to the end of my sort of initial introductory remarks. Is everybody reasonably happy about how the business will proceed? Good. In which case, I'm going to move to introductions of the council and parties, and I'm going to ask the council to kick off.
Kelvin Hinton, I'm the Planning Policy Manager with the Borough Council.
Thank you, sir. My name is Adrian Tofts. I am Planning Policy Team Leader with Tunbridge Wells Borough Council.
Hello, I'm Sharon Evans, Senior Planning Officer within the Planning Policy Team at Tunbridge Wells Borough Council.
Thank you very much. Now, can we move on to Cooper Estates?
Thank you, sir. My name is Gregory James, Queen's Counsel, and with me is Robin Buchanan, Pro-Dig. As we explained this morning, we're largely here observing part C2 people that were mentioned earlier this morning. And as I said, that's Robin Buchanan, town planner next.
Thank you very much for that. And then Southern Water.
I'm Susan Southborough, Regional Planning Manager at Southern Water, and I've got my colleague Michael Tomlinson as technical expert here today.
Thank you very much. Now, sir, would you mind moving your Toblerone a little, because it's stuck behind a big stack of... Thank you very much.
Stephen Ward, Planning Consultant for ABP Food Group.
Thank you very much.
Elizabeth Aikenhead, Campaign for Protection of Rural England, Tunbridge Wells.
Thank you very much, Lady Aikenhead. Now, I do notice there's a Toblerone in the corner there, but an empty chair. Mr. Hetherington, can I just check with the programme officer? Is Mr. Hetherington present, or...? Okay, well, we've made arrangements for him. If he arrives late, we'll just try and kind of draw him in. Kent County Council, apologies. We've also got another one that I believe Kent County Council were not proposing to attend this afternoon. No, I think that was the latest position. Okay, so we've gone to CPRE, Civic Society.
Dr. Philip Whitbourne, Architect Planner, Royal Tunbridge Wells Civic Society.
Brian Lippard, Vice Chairman of the Tunbridge Wells Civic Society.
Thank you very much.
William Hall, Director, Broadlands Planning.
Broadlands, okay.
Grace Mollart from Planning Potential on behalf of Aldi Stores.
Okay. And again, could I ask for the Broadland Toblerone to move to my left, to your right, and then the Aldi one just to come a little bit back so that I can see it past the water jugs. That's perfect. Okay. Dandara.
Rachel Arwood from Dandara. We are owners of Union House and Knightswood Developments.
42 Leisure.
Joanna Chambers, Changing Cities Planning Consultant for 42 Leisure.
Thank you very much.
Hannah Fortune from Nathaniel Litchfield and Partners on behalf of Carraway Tunbridge Wells, owners of Royal Victoria Place Shopping Centre.
Thank you. Now we have a Toblerone for Gladman, but no presence. So I will move on finally to Mr. Haskett.
My name is Dennis Haskett. I'm one of the ancients of Southborough, having lived there for over half a century. I'm also the longest serving member on the Tunbridge Wells Access Group. I'm a former chairman of that group, and I'm currently its president.
Thank you very much, Mr. Haskett. Okay, now, in terms of any other preliminary or procedural issues that anybody wishes to raise before we move into the main business of this afternoon's agenda, is there anything else that anybody is unclear about or needs to resolve procedurally? No. In which case, let us move then to Matter D, which is the specific examination of detail in terms of the proposals affecting Royal Tunbridge Wells and Southborough. Now, in terms of taking this in a particular order, I'm afraid I'm departing from the order in my original Matters, Issues and Questions paper by taking main issue 4, infrastructure, first. And obviously I've received and have read the council submission that has addressed my questions. Can I now see a show of Toblerones from those interested parties who wish to speak on the infrastructure matter? I'd particularly highlight Southern Water here because they are here at my request, and this is the time when we'll deal with Southern Water matters. Okay. Southern Water, can you upend your Toblerone? Thank you very much. Is there anybody else who particularly feels they need to speak on infrastructure items? And when we're talking about infrastructure items here, we're talking essentially about water, drainage, sewerage, parking, access, highways, all the gamut of urban services that keep towns livable, useful places. Okay. Moving then to Southern Water. I mean, essentially, my reason for asking Southern Water to attend today, and I'm very grateful for the effort that you've made to come, is just to ensure that we are in a position where the reservations that you have expressed about the ability to meet the sewerage requirements of particular sites in Royal Tunbridge Wells and Southborough are reservations that are capable of technical resolution. And secondly, given that you've proposed amendments to the specific wording of policy and you've drawn my attention to approaches taken by other inspectors that mirror the approach that you're setting out, to check with the council that they are content with the proposed approach. So, can we do that? Can we do that exercise? First of all, no outstanding technical constraints. Are you happy with that summary?
Yeah, that's correct. We haven't identified any reason why we couldn't find a solution, but we have carried out site-specific assessments and found that existing capacity is insufficient for some of the sites, the highlighted sites. That doesn't mean that there's a constraint to development, because additional capacity can be provided, and we look to work in collaboration with the planning authority and developers to ensure that the infrastructure is delivered in parallel with the development.
Indeed. Now, just exploring that a little, in a number of the written representations, folk have referred to, and I'm looking here, for example, at the Warwick Park Residents Association document, which is 25333/1. They've referred to infrastructure not being necessarily sufficient to support proposed development. There's relatively little specific. There have been some suggestions as well that maybe there are areas where runoff is moving into the sewer system, that the sewer system's old and in need of a certain amount of additional work. These are all matters that you've taken into account in the response that you've provided in your document.
I've picked up that one site, was it land, is it RWT8?
Yep.
RTW8?
RTW8, yeah. That's the one that I was looking at just.
Yeah, that's one of the sites that we have assessed, and we found that existing capacity is insufficient to meet the anticipated demand. But as I say, that's not a constraint to development, but it's important that planning policies support provision of that additional capacity in parallel with the development, so that we can work in collaboration with the planning authority and developers to ensure that that infrastructure is delivered at the right time.
And that indeed has then become one of the individual sites where you're proposing the addition of this extra bullet point. And just to be clear, those extra bullet points are broadly the same. RTW3, RTW4, RTW6, RTW8, as we've just discussed, RTW10, slightly different form of words in RTW11 because the structure of the policy is slightly different, but saying the same thing, 13, and SO2, the Southborough hub. Okay, and you're absolutely clear that that's sufficient to meet your needs. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think that summarises our position. Thank you.
Okay. Is there anybody else around the table before I move to the council? You've seen the approach that Southern Water proposed to take to the issue, the problem that's been identified. Is there anybody who is in principle taking the view that that's not enough or some other or different approach ought to be taken? Okay, I'll go to the Civic Society and then I'll go to CPRE.
Yeah, specifically on the Warwick Park, the issue is that the sewerage system is not sufficient at the moment. So I think they're just saying, we can add some more by adding it. The point is, it's not sufficient at the moment.
Okay. But again, just to check, you're content that if they do what they say they will do in tandem with the developer, that there's no, in principle, bar to development?
Well, are they committing to make it okay for the whole road, or just so they can put in sufficient, supposedly, for the extra development? That's where the nub of the difference is.
Right. So there are circumstances where there are actual problems already being experienced, and it's not just a case of meeting additional need, it's a case of sorting out the problem that's already there. Okay, I'll come back to Southern Water briefly on that when I've spoken to the Civic Society.
My point concerns parking, so perhaps we should finish water first, or drainage.
Let's finish water and drainage and then go on to parking. Okay, can I just return the point that was made by the Civic Society to Southern Water? Circumstances where it's alleged that an individual area within which a site is located already has a standing problem.
Yes, I understand that there are existing problems within the Warwick Road, Park Avenue area. We will obviously look at addressing some of the issues going forward, but from a development perspective, we cannot ask the developer to actually pay for any betterment of the system. It is purely providing capacity for, as we've identified, there is no capacity, hence we need to have the condition on the planning so that we can provide adequate capacity. Is that...
Yes, I mean, the sense that I'm getting from you is the kind of fairly standard approach to the split between working out what is the upgrade required as a consequence of the development itself and seeking the funding of that by way of condition or agreement, or alternatively, what is the backlog in repair or the general upgrade requirement of the whole system. That's something that you wouldn't ask the developer to contribute to because it's the issue is not caused by their development.
That is correct, yes.
And that's a fairly standard approach. That split is a fairly standard approach across all infrastructure systems. We're not talking about anything that's unusual here.
No. We're only looking for the developer to provide the capacity required for that site.
Yeah. Okay. However, I guess in the minds of the Civic Society there is a worry, which is that if there are little bits of system that aren't working as well as they ought, is there in programme something that might solve some of those problems?
Yes. I think one thing I can add is obviously we're aware that there was recent flooding in Tunbridge Wells. As part of that, Kent County Council are carrying out a Section 19 investigation under the Flood and Water Management Act. They're doing that in conjunction on consultation with Southern Water, and we actually have a meeting at the end of this week to actually look at their findings, and we're actually contributing to that. But in the area we're experiencing flooding, and so I think this is what we were just covering now. Southern Water would seek as a minimum to ensure that new development does not exacerbate the existing risk of foul water flooding. We need to collaborate with developers and planning authority to achieve this. So that's what...
Okay, yes. Are you wishing to add something to that, or...?
No, just emphasise that in areas where there have been flood events, as my colleague says, as a minimum, we would seek to ensure that new development didn't make the existing situation worse. But we would also look for opportunities to improve, and that would be part of an overall programme for Southern Water's operational area. So we need to look at, when we prepare our business plan as a company, we carry out customer research to look into what our customers would like us to do. And from that research, our customers indicate that they would like Southern Water to concentrate or focus on areas that or properties that experience internal flooding over areas that experience external flooding. And our customers don't want us to or don't want to pay for Southern Water to resolve all flooding issues. So in that situation, Southern Water has to make priorities, and so we have to look across our whole operational area and look at priorities for resolving any existing flooding issues. And in that process, we are fully committed to work in collaboration with other flood risk management authorities, including Kent County Council, who is the lead local flood authority in this area, the Environment Agency, and the Borough Council itself. So this is, part of the partnership working that Southern Water is committed to carry out. And as I say, we need to consider the results from our customer research, and we need to make priorities in that context across our whole area.
Cutting to the chase here, is this flooding problem, the one that the Civic Society have referred to, one that is known to be primarily caused by the surcharge of sewers by surface water runoff drainage? Do we know an answer to that?
I can't give you detail on specific sites, but it is likely that surface water runoff contribution to the system is causing a restriction in the capacity.
Okay. Now, Mr. Hinton for the council has had his Toblerone up for a while. I'm going to, which I suspect means that he wants to come in on the specifics of some of the points that have just been raised. So I'll go to him first, then I'll come to the Civic Society for a response. Mr. Hinton.
Thank you, sir. Just to assist, I'm aware that the council corporate has been facilitating a discussion between the Residents Association and Southern Water regarding the particular issues that arise in this part of the town. And you are right that those issues are partly as a result of the combined system that exists, but also a concern about the cumulative impact of a number of very small forms of development, on an individual property basis, which, for instance, could be permitted development, but nonetheless could have a consequence for the system. So the council, I can just confirm that the council is facilitating that discussion to try and help find solutions to existing problems that wouldn't necessarily be the province of large-scale development to address.
Okay, thank you very much. As I indicated, I'll go to the Civic Society, and then I think we need to hear from the council in terms of an overarching response to the issues that have been raised, and we also need to canvass the council's final opinion on the proposed policy amendments. Civic Society.
Yeah, I'm concerned to hear that apparently it's okay to add existing sewage demands onto a system that can't cope at the moment. Apparently that's all right. I don't know if you have any power to commit them to sort out the underlying problem first and only then be allowed to add extra capacity onto it, or extra problems onto it, rather.
Okay, well, I hear what you say, and it all goes into the melting pot. I will then turn to the council. Who's leading on this one? Is this Mr. Hinton?
Well, since I intervened, I might as well follow through. I think in terms of the broad principles, there's very little to say. The council would take a standard approach, i.e. where we are seeking to allocate, we have identified the particular flooding drainage infrastructure that is required in cooperation with Southern Water and the other relevant agencies. So I think I can just confirm the scenario that Southern Water have set out in terms of how they, as a particular agency, look at these things and how they discuss it with ourselves, developers and the other agencies. Just to confirm that. Secondly, in terms of the modifications that they're suggesting, I can confirm that the council is content to accept those, and we can take those forward as further modifications to the plan.
Thank you very much. Now, before we leave the topic of drainage and sewerage, is there anybody else with specific concerns about this topic? Because I guess it's important if you do have concerns about it to raise those concerns now, because my suggestion then was going to be that if Southern Water had better things to do with their time than sit here for an entire afternoon, I would release them. But I don't want to let them go. If somebody needs to raise water and drainage, particularly drainage issues, later on this afternoon. Silence seems to indicate your liberty to leave if you so wish. Many, many thanks to Southern Water for attending this afternoon. Now, we haven't finished infrastructure because we've also got the topic of parking. I asked some questions about parking in my written questions, essentially dealing with the proposition that a number of the allocated sites contain parking, and therefore the cumulative impact of implementing a number of the allocations on its face might be a reduction in the extent of available parking, and essentially asking the council for a response to that point, which they've provided in their written statement. However, CPRE.
Well, CPRE has also been concerned about the extent of increased retail and so forth that appear to be going to be provided without an apparent increase in parking spaces to serve them. We have a large number of additional house dwellings to be built, and they obviously will have their own parking, but they will from time to time perhaps need to, they won't all walk or cycle to the town centre to do their various shopping activities. And we are concerned that the policies seem to say that for redeveloping the car parks seem to say at least as many. That technically could mean that they just provide the same number as are there at the moment. So you've got potentially an increased demand and a static quantity, or even, of course, it'll reduce while perhaps the development is actually taking place. So there could be quite a crisis. Now, the Borough Council relies heavily on a proposal for park and ride, but proposals for park and ride have been kicking around for decades in this borough. There's a site at Pembury, which is the only one still surviving at Tesco's, which may perhaps eventually come forward and happen, although we've been waiting. It's had permission for a very long time and nothing's happened. Other proposals from the south of the town and from the A26, the sort of Southborough end, that it would appear, are going to involve building eventually on greenfield sites. No sites have been actually allocated, but there's sort of talk in the transport policy about eventually doing that. Well, that's all very pie in the sky, and in fact CPRE would strongly oppose covering large areas of precious countryside, greenfield, AOMB, greenbelt with tarmac to accommodate park and ride.
Now, without taking the words out of the Council's mouth, in Appendix 2 of their main issue for infrastructure statement, at paragraph 3, they essentially say, having undertaken an evaluation of the available spare capacity in town centre parking and noting that there are times of year when that is consumed, particularly during the festive period or special events, where demand is occasionally greater than supply, they then look to what they refer to as alternative strategies need to be considered to look at the many unrestricted streets in and around the town to establish how they can be controlled and managed to provide either permanent additional parking spaces or to deal with peaks and troughs. Is that a question directly back to the Council? I assume that's residence parking permits and related means of providing paid for or bay controlled parking on inner urban streets.
Yes, there's some of the strategies that are being looked at through the parking strategy that the Council has produced.
And is it fair to conclude from the paper that you've put in that you're confident that if you take that measure that you'll be able to at least compensate for the demand generated by any new development that comes about as a consequence of this plan being implemented?
Yes, I think that, and the other measures that are set out in the parking strategy is part of the whole.
But that's your kind of bottom of your cascade of interventions. But you've got a new intervention that you're not currently doing that you could do, and that could deliver you considerably more capacity.
Yeah.
Okay. Have there been sort of public consultations, for want of a better description? What has the conversation with communities happened about doing things like that?
Yes, as far as I'm aware, there have been consultations with residents where they've been affected on sort of residents' parking zones, and overall consultation on the parking strategy as well.
So the parking strategy itself, just remind me if I've missed it, but that was a publicly. So it's a draft parking strategy 2015-2026, prepared following discussions with residents, business and other stakeholders. I mean, I guess what I felt I needed to know there was whether it had been consulted, I guess, to the same breadth that most planning documents would be. It had been on your consultation portal and people had had an open opportunity to contribute to it, etc.
Yes, it has been subject to public consultation. We can give you more details of that if you wanted the finer detail on it.
Okay. And it's a draft strategy, so does that imply it's not yet been back to full council or cabinet or wherever it needs to go to receive a final stamp of approval?
It's going through the processes at the moment. No, it hasn't been back yet to full council.
Okay. So, Lady Aikenhead.
I think we have an irreconcilable difference of opinion here.
I suspect you maybe do. And the progress that's been made on the parking strategy is where it's at. And I guess I have to weigh the matters that you've brought to the table against the matters that the council brought to the table and form a view. Bearing in mind that I won't have an endorsed parking strategy by the end of this examination. What I would highlight, rather than asking for any detailed additional work to be done, is that if that does go through its final decision-making stage in the next month or so, I'd be very grateful if somebody could write to me and just highlight that it has and that it's therefore no longer draft, and we can have an approved strategy on the website.
Could I just ask also that we get some sort of figure as to the number of actual parking spaces that are going to be provided by introducing residence parking, actual public parking spaces by introducing parking bays on the residential streets? Public parking spaces that aren't already available and used.
I mean, that's a reasonable request in relation to the conclusion that's reached in this paper that there's more than enough if you do that. More than enough of what?
Well, I think we would argue that most of those spaces are already being used.
Okay. Is there somewhere... I mean, I have to say, I didn't read the strategy itself in detail in preparing for today. Obviously noted the extracts that you've provided to me. Is there somewhere in the strategy that you can point us to that actually says, these are broadly the range, minimum to maximum numbers of additional parking spaces that could be generated by street schemes?
I think we'll have to have a look at the parking strategy and get back to you on that one. We'll have to look at it in a bit more detail.
Can we make sure we're talking about public parking spaces and not residence parking spaces also?
Yes, we should have made that very clear. Thank you for the further interjection on that. Yes, I mean, what I'm interested in here isn't the provision of residence parking, convenient though that may be for residents. The issue is looking at managing potential additional demand from the town centre. And so it's paid for public parking bays.
Can I just raise the point also that we are seeking to make an amendment to to some of the policies, particularly the area of change policies, in relation to parking, where we will probably get to the wording of those in a bit, but we have amended those slightly to just not say, it doesn't just say maintain existing parking, but there's scope to increase it or decrease it as necessary.
Yeah, and essentially meet the need. The way I read that change was meet the need of the development that ends up on the site. Does that partially mollify CPRE's concern? Because that's in a parallel stream next to this conversation that the area of change policies will potentially be amended to say that.
Yes, I think it does.
Good. Okay, well, let's bear that in mind. But look, I think it would be useful if there's, again, not vast amounts of additional work, but if you can point me to an existing paragraph in the parking strategy that says this is where we think X parking bays can be created, that would be very useful. Does that bring that matter to an end? Okay, now, Mr. Haskett.
Sorry. I don't know whether, Inspector, this is the appropriate point, but is it possible to ask a question about parking in Southborough? My
Absolutely.
concern is that for a long time it's been recognised that additional public parking was necessary. What worries me is that it may be that the council has in mind taking a further chunk out of the Ridgeway playing fields for that purpose, and I just wanted a reassurance that that wasn't the case.
Well, if that's something that the council can very swiftly pick up.
In terms of that, so I refer you to policy ALSO2 for the Southborough Hub, where the policy is expecting retention of the existing public car parking capacity.
And that would be within the allocated site?
Within the allocated site.
So what is shown on the proposals map that was prepared with the plan is the land on which that would need to take place. It's not stealing, in inverted commas, more land from anywhere else. Is that clear? Yeah? Okay, in which case, let's move on. Is there anything else that anybody wishes to raise broadly within the remit of the infrastructure topic as I framed it in the matters, issues and questions or the agenda? No. In which case, let us move to main issues 1 and 2, the urban design framework and area of change policies. Now, I'm conscious here that we did have some exploratory conversations, useful exploratory conversations in the November hearings, particularly with the Civic Society. And what I don't want to do is to end up going back over old ground, especially given that the Council have made a number of particular responses, particularly in terms of proposed changes to the area of change policies. So I saw this section of the agenda as being very much about the specifics of individual policies and getting to grips with the detail of wordings and with the detail of the changes that the Council have proposed. But before we do so, given that the urban design framework was in here, I thought I should just check back with the Civic Society and see if there are further detailed issues that need to be dealt with in terms of that policy.
I don't think so, sir. I think that much in the urban design framework is welcome in that it provides some of the background that the abandoned town centre area action plan should have provided. I think I'm less comfortable with Appendix C, which contains a number of inconsistencies, but they are sort of ideas that may or may not be deliverable.
Okay. Just to make sure that we're all on the same page here, we're at AL/RTW1, the Urban Design Framework. Anybody else with anything else to put before we move on to the detail of area of change policy areas? Apologies. Yes. Sorry, can I just see your nameplate? Caraway. Thank you very much.
It's a really quick one, and I was here when we had the conversation.
Yes, you
initially. And it's a small point. We're slightly concerned that by the sort of additional text and the sort of simplifying it and updating it, that it's perhaps become a bit more prescriptive and in terms of the wording. And it's just one part where it says the new development will be required to conform with. Obviously, the Urban Design Framework are guidelines, it's a supplementary planning document, and it doesn't go into the level of detail that perhaps detailed developments will come up with. Obviously, everyone knows we've just submitted one for RVP, so we're going through it, and by its very nature, the council couldn't be required to go into that level of detail for each and every site referred to. So it's just that element of it that perhaps leaves us a little bit uncomfortable with what it's trying to achieve and whether or not something could be done in that respect. Given that it's guidelines and guidance, and we don't want it to become too inflexible.
Okay, I'm just reviewing the proposed revised wording of ALRTW1, which is on the back page of the Council Statement PS/41. will be required to conform with, which isn't actually a change. That's part of the original wording of...
I think because it used to say it has anticipated that, and then suddenly by removing that, it becomes, in our view, much stronger.
Yeah, no, I'd missed the implication of that, but yes, by removing it is anticipated that it does. I mean, is this a case of it is anticipated that new development will deliver the directions of or wording of that nature?
Exactly. It's sort of acknowledging that the urban design framework is a set of illustrative principles as opposed to being specific guidelines and requirements of policy. So as I said, it's a small but quite, in our view, quite important kind of point that perhaps could be clarified.
Okay, to the council.
Yes, that sort of came out in a effort to try and improve the sort of comprehensibility of the policy almost. But I think part of the problem was that the policy was written kind of in the future tense when the urban design framework hadn't yet happened. So in redrafting this with the cooperation of the civic society, we were intending to present it more as a policy that is now in operation almost. So that is the reason that we took out, it is anticipated that.
But it is, of course, a supplementary planning document. It isn't a development plan policy. And is there an argument that will be required to conform with is perhaps a little stronger than might normally be expected in those circumstances?
I mean, from a borough council point of view, we would be okay with putting back it is anticipated that, but this is a joint statement with the civic society.
Yeah.
So
I'll ask the civic society for their view on it.
I don't think we would want to make an issue of it. So.
Okay. I do see where that comes from. So if the council would be prepared to consider having one more go at those words in a way that would reflect the nature of the document as SPD. Mr. Tofts.
I just wonder if a colleague has passed me a note, expected to conform to, would that be an appropriate form of words? I think part of the problem here is that we are kind of simultaneously with revising this wording, colleagues are going through the consultation comments on the urban design framework SPD itself and are proposing changes in relation to the public comments we got on that document. So it's a kind of juggling act of trying to tie both processes together and making sure they're consistent.
Indeed, and I guess if you know that you have a whole load of submissions there that aren't here that say there is a strong public expectation of delivery of the principles set out in that document, then the last thing you want to do is to be seen to water it down. How did that sound?
I think that sounded okay.
Okay. Yeah. Can we take an action out of that then, that the council will review that and if they're prepared to make that amendment, they put that back in, and we'll need to keep a rolling table of the proposed changes. So the document that council's already got will need refreshing, but we'll get to that in terms of practicalities of how that's done at the end of the week. Okay. Is there anything else that we need to touch on in terms of RTW1? Or can we move to main issue 2, areas of change? And here we're dealing with the council's written statement, PS/42. Now, what I was proposing to do here, given that there are some reasonably substantial changes proposed, and given that those changes are responsive to discussions that we had in the November sessions, was actually reverse what has previously been the order, where I've called for submissions from representors and then gone to the council for a conclusion, because the council are proposing a position in this paper, or a number of positions. So I was going to ask the council to present this paper in summary, and then I'll go to representatives, and then I'll return briefly to the council for a response to anything that the representatives have said. Who's going to lead on this? Mr. Tofts.
Yes, sir. Thank you. In essence, what we did after the November hearings was revisit these policies, and it seemed to us that we needed to make changes to them to emphasise the deliverability of the sites and to allow sufficient flexibility for them to come forward. So what we are proposing is to keep with the Crescent Road, Church Road area of change and the Vale Avenue area of change, but make some amendments to the policy wording. But to remove Eridge Road specifically as an area of change, to keep it in as an allocation and divide it up into what we felt was the two very different areas within the area, and specifically with regard to the development discussions that are taking place as regards the Dandara site. So in Appendix 1 to the Matter D main issue 2 statement, we are proposing various changes to the supporting text, and this is again to set out hopefully more clearly our approach to the cautious approach we've taken to sort of housing capacity on those sites. Then Appendix 2 puts forward the new policy wording, and rather than do a sort of extensive track change version of the various different policies, we have presented just a new policy wording as we felt that would be clearer. So splitting it up into two, the first policy, to a civic complex Crescent Road area of change, 2B former cinema site area of change, and you will also note there's been a slight revision of the allocation boundary to remove parts of the area we didn't think would come forward within the plan period. And moving on to policy AL RTW3, the Vale Avenue area of change, again some rewording of that, particularly as we've highlighted earlier in relation to, for example, to parking provision. And finally, in that section, to split up the former Eridge Road area of change into two, focusing those policies, one on the Dandara site, the Union House site, and two on the area around it, the land at Montacute Gardens, given what we felt would be the different timescales on which those sites would come forward.
Okay, that's a useful, I think, summary of the changes that are proposed, given that they are quite substantial. I think the best way to take this then will be, first of all, to look at RTW 2A and 2B, then to look at RTW 3, and then finally to come to Eridge Road, RTW 4A and B as currently suggested, simply because the nature of the change there is more substantial than the change in the other two. So can I first of all see Toblerones from those who wish to speak to RTW 2A and RTW 2B, the civic complex and the former cinema site area of change? Crikey. Well, do I take it then that the Civic Society are content?
No.
I knew it wouldn't be that easy.
We're content with a lot of the words, but we're not content with what's actually going on. I think it's hard to quarrel with these words, but what is actually what is going to happen to the civic complex, to this listed town hall, we don't know. There are various uses that are mentioned in a nebulous way, that some of which would probably be unsuitable, like retail.
But we did explore at quite some detail in the November hearings, for example, the potential yields of retail, so that we had a sense for what the council's ambitions were, and were, I guess, able, insofar as we need to in a plan, as distinct from a planning application, we were able to look at the potential impacts on the heritage assets on the site.
I think I can only sum up that these words as such seem generally unexceptionable, but there remains a great worry as to what will actually happen to the civic complex and to this area generally.
I guess where I'm trying to get to, though, is whether that is a worry that a plan can resolve for you, or whether it's a worry that in the normal run of planning and development would be carried forward into the development management process, where you would no doubt make representations on an application or applications that emerged on those sites.
Yes, it was originally our hope, of course, that there would be a town centre area action plan that would put all these things into a proper context, and that has never happened, and that's one of the difficulties that we're living with throughout this. So the cinema site, the town hall, this ideas of a theatre and a new office block that isn't in the site allocations at all would all have slotted, one would have hoped, into a town centre area action plan. We haven't got that overarching document, so that is why it's all a bit of a muddled mystery. But that's not to say that we're taking exception to these words.
Okay. Well, I think that the town centre action plan point again is one that we did touch on in November. Is there anybody else wishing to contribute on RTW2A or B? No. So if I can just return to the council for any concluding words they want to add there. My only remark being that obviously as the extent of the proposed allocation at RTW2B is changing, so land that was proposed to be allocated is no longer proposed, this feels like it's a main modification because there is a need to engage with potentially affected persons and give them a full opportunity to be consulted on this change.
Yes, we would concur with that, sir.
Okay. Anything else you want to add on these in the light of what the Civic Society have said?
I don't think so, other than we are conscious of the heritage value of the site, and part of the policy does require the conservation statement, which has already been produced and is part of the core document library. So we believe we've taken that into account in drawing up the policy, and in the future it will be a consideration of any planning application.
Okay. So if we then can move on to RTW3 Vale Avenue. I'm just having a senior moment here. I'm just trying to locate this one on.
Near the railway station.
That's it. Got you. Yes. Okay. And I've now recalled that one to mind from my site inspection. Okay. Actually, one thing I will add is into the horrible planning jargon. You know, we're all using these acronyms for sites that are known and loved by other real names. If anybody becomes completely bamboozled at any point, don't just sit there quietly thinking, what are they talking about? Shout up. And I'm sure one of the council team will go and highlight the relevant site on the maps, which are all on display in the room, so that we can actually find out where things actually are. So yes, this is the combination site to the rear of the station, the Morrison's land, if I'm correct, and also office development on Vale Avenue, which is a cul-de-sac street leading into the rear of car parking. Anyone with particular points or observations to make about this as proposed to be changed? Or indeed, in principle, before the proposal for change? No. Okay, well, I didn't have any remaining questions on that. So, can we then move on to RTW 4 and 4A? What I want to do here, 4A rather, and 4B, what I want to do here is, I'm conscious there'll be a number of speakers on this. Can I just see the show of Toblerones? Okay. Sorry, madam, yours is backwards. I can't read them. No, that I can read. There, 42 Leisure. 42 Leisure, Dandara, Civic Society. Okay. My guess is this may take more than the kind of 15, 20 minutes or so that we've got left before the first break in the afternoon. So I'm going to suggest we break now. We come back at 25 past, and then we can get a good clean run at it without knocking people off track. Everybody content? Let's break then, ladies and gentlemen. Let's return to where we were on the agenda, which was partway through matter D, main issue 2, in the areas of change, and just about to start looking at AL RTW 4A and 4B as currently proposed, Eridge Road, bearing in mind that this is a shift away now, proposed to be, from an area of change as it was originally suggested to be defined in the plan, into a general allocation and a subdivision into 2. So, who wishes to speak first? Dandara or 42 Leisure? Okay, let's hear from 42 Leisure.
Well, our view is that it's a retrogressive step, that the Eridge Road area of change has been a consistent feature of the draft site allocations document since 2013, and its allocation was there in recognition of the importance of this area to the southern part of Tunbridge Wells, and in particular to the revitalisation of the pantiles and the general historic environment of that area. By splitting the site in 2, I think we lose total sight of the importance of this area and the need for a comprehensive approach, which we talked at length about at the hearing a couple of weeks ago. We have spoken in detail about the importance of a master plan. It's master plan principles which will ensure that the principles set out in the policy are brought forward in the course of development. Our feeling is by splitting the site, it is a bit of a cop-out in terms of dealing with sites coming forward at different times, which could be dealt with through a partnership approach with the landowners and developers and with a master plan framework setting out the principles for development. But that this approach does nothing to help the southern part of the town or the general revitalisation of the area.
Okay, and I'm conscious here, I'm referring to 42 Leisure's paper on matter D issue 2, and that's reference number 76336/1, and the attachment to it, which was entitled Grand Landmark, Reviving the Glory of Royal Tunbridge Wells, with, you know, what amounted to essentially a kind of urban design framework for sort of this prospectively part one of a master plan.
This document was, although it's dated on the front, February 2013, was actually shared with the council in 2010 and has been, I think, has influenced and informed the preparation of the site allocations document. As you'll be aware, 42 Leisure have a small landholding interest within the site, but has always maintained that there's a need for a comprehensive approach and for landowners to work together with the council and other stakeholders, including the Civic Society Town Forum, to bring forward the principles in that. As I said, the master plan is a vision. It's a vision that's been shared by 42 Leisure with the council, discussed at length with the council over the period of consultation on the site allocations document, and principles in that are very much consistent with the principles set out in the policy, which is why 42 Leisure has very much supported the policy from the time it was first drafted. So to see it change so dramatically at this stage, we feel actually goes contrary to a lot of that work and the principles that have been established over a period of time to reflect not only the vision of 42 Leisure, but the vision that we see in the urban design framework, which is very much relating to this, and also the vision in the town vision that's being prepared by the Town Forum and the Civic Society.
Okay, now looking at your submitted statement in paragraph 2.3 and figure 1, you very helpfully break down the land ownership parcels. Which one of those is 42 Leisure's main interest?
42 Leisure is marked number 2 on that plan.
Fine.
So it's the land to the front of the villas in Montacute Gardens and then land to the rear of number 6, Montacute Gardens, and to the rear of number 4.
Okay.
The reason for submitting that in our representations was to try and give you some confidence that the freehold position wasn't as complex as it might first have appeared with a number of different properties.
I'm very grateful for it.
And has shown that over a period of time there has been active site assembly taking place. And in fact that principal freeholders are speaking together with regards to bringing that land forward.
Okay. And then, just to check, I'll come to Dandara fully in a minute because I suspect 42 Leisure have got more to say, but if I can just check, Dandara, you're number 1 shown on that.
That's
plan,
right, yeah.
That plan. Okay. So, are there further observations that 42 Leisure need to make?
No, I think it would be to reiterate the discussions we had previously about the importance of the comprehensive approach and the fact that this area is so important that it needs a strategic approach and is not going to be adequately safeguarded if it is split into 2 sites, which would actually lead to a piecemeal approach. The one other point I would make, which is reference to the plan at the rear of the council statement, which is on page... it's got a page number.
Yeah, no, it doesn't have a page number.
Page 10. It's the plan which shows the two site boundaries,
yes.
Which is AL RTW4A and AL RTW4B. The point I would make there is that in all of the previous documents, the site has been divided in a different way. Before the identification of the Erridge Road area of change, in the earlier draft area action plan, the site was split so that the Montacute Gardens area included the car park on the frontage of Erridge Road, and the Union House site just was the footprint of the existing building. And the reason for that, as you might be aware from site visits, is that the access road to Montacute Gardens actually crosses the car park. So you cannot treat the two sites separately, and I think that's a very important point to make, that they are intrinsically linked because of the access road.
Yes, although it would, playing devil's advocate briefly for a moment, it would be possible to bring about a comprehensive redevelopment of ALRTW4A that was subject to a reservation of access through to RTW4B.
That is a possibility, but it would actually very much compromise how you designed, I think, RTW4A.
Could I just ask that whoever's mobile phone is... We've lost our programme officer. Apologies, ladies and gentlemen.
But I think there are other common features as well with regards to not just the car park, but the re-provision of car parking. Also, as I'm sure will be referred to during the discussions, the issue of the common land designation and
Indeed.
the possibility of re-provision of open space within the area of change to compensate for that if that were to be considered to be an appropriate approach.
Okay. Now, before I move to Dandara, I did just want to ask you briefly about your paragraph 4.2, where you're essentially saying that you think there should be an increase in the allocated area, which, following the logic of your previous argument, would still remain as a single and area of change policy as opposed to a divided general allocation.
Yeah. The reason for this is if we're taking a forward view, is to think about a vision for the area. We talked earlier about potential to increase capacity of the area. What you have there are very large landlocked back gardens, the rear properties in Linden Park Road, also the commercial properties in Linden Close. Now, to actually think of the future of that site without actually looking at the potential future of those areas, we think is actually it's probably a mistake at this stage. And that, as we've always said, in an area of change, land will come forward at different times. But to actually start to plan and develop an area without having regard for the possibility that other land may come forward in the future, we think would be a failure of the plan at the moment, and again lead to a less than optimum solution.
Okay. Now, one final question that I've got for you, which is, I don't believe you were here this morning. You weren't sitting.
I was, yes.
You were. So you've heard
yes, I have.
You heard the housing debate, and you heard that one of the shifts that the council are proposing in order to address concerns about adequacy of 5-year housing land supply is to take a view that within 5-year delivery would be achievable on, and I'm sure the council will correct me if I'm wrong, what would now be ALRTW4A.
Yes. That's correct, sir, yeah.
Okay. What would be your view about the capacity of the site to deliver material volumes of housing within 5 years if it remains as an area of change as originally proposed and as a full allocation as originally proposed, or indeed were to be further extended, as you suggest?
I believe it would still be perfectly possible to do that. There are other areas of land, as we said, if you look at the land ownership plan, areas of land that are coming forward to the rear of Montacute Gardens, which could come forward in that 5-year plan period. I think the key point is that as was discussed at the previous hearing, that when we talk about a master plan, we don't have to talk about an SPD or something that is gone through every stage of adoption. It can be a master plan framework that is agreed, setting out key principles for development of that site. I think we had this discussion a couple of weeks ago that the preparation of master plan, I don't think will delay things, and I think it could have benefits. If it is seen as a master plan framework, setting those principles. If I give an example, one of the requirements set out in the policy is the creation of a pedestrian route through from the Pantiles to the Sainsbury's site to the west. Now, setting those principles, in the master plan are very key before we start to actually approve individual planning applications. So it's looking at the totality, but within that, understanding that development will be phased over time and that some sites will come forward earlier. Regards to the point Mr. Toff made about the site being RTW4A, I would actually point out it's only half of RTW4A, that half of the site isn't currently being proposed for development. Okay. So immediately it's a half a site rather than a whole site that is coming forward there.
I'll put that one back to the council, or I'm sure they'll pick it up when they respond to all of this. Now, I'm sorry, there are just a couple more questions that do emerge for me from this written submission. First being, looking at the Grand Landmark document that was submitted with your written submission, and looking at the date on that, but also referring to what you just said earlier, which is that the principles that sets out are considerably older and longer established than the date of that document. I guess a remaining question that's in my mind is, if there has been a significant passage of time since those principles were articulated, and yet the land ownership is still as shown in your figure 1, and there is no clear view of a, I guess, integrated partnership forming to actually deliver the sort of solution shown in the Grand Landmark document immediately. I guess what I'm trying to form is a view on whether the sort of vision set out in that document is deliverable within a, say, 5-year timescale, without other rather more radical approaches being used, such as the council looking at CPO for land assembly.
I think the first priority is for partners to work together. That is quite clear. Things do change over time. We've had changes in the permitted development rights, which have certainly presented a different potential future for Union House. But I don't think it stops the partners coming together to actually seek to bring forward plans for an area. With regards to timescales, as I say, I think progress has been made over that time. When we started back in 2013, it was appearing at the time that British Steel Pension Fund would not release the land for some time. So we really had the biggest barrier to bringing the vision forward, which was an unwilling landowner at that stage to actually participate in the process. I think the sale of Union House has actually helped to unlock the process, but it's actually ensuring that the proper considerations are brought to bear in bringing development forward. And that relates to all aspects in terms of design, in terms of impact on the heritage of the area, parking, pedestrian connectivity. All of those elements are absolutely key in this. But I don't think, in terms of realising the vision, which is something that is good for Tunbridge Wells and something that Tunbridge Wells can be proud of, that must be absolutely essential to everybody's focus on this. And whilst elements of the vision might change in terms of land uses, I think key elements of that vision are still perfectly attainable at the present time. And as I said, that the progress that's being made elsewhere is, when you look at the figure 1, what you have there is significant progress being made to assemble the land to the rear of Montacute Gardens and to the front into ownerships where the landowners are talking and have entered into an MOU with regards to the future. So I think it is actually achievable within that time.
Thank you very much. Now, what I'll just add by way of a note, so that again, if the council can pick this up when you answer all of the material in this part of the agenda, we did discuss in November the possibility of adding words to area of change policies in general, this having ceased to be an area of change policy now, but that would deal with, for example, the use of land assembly powers if that was deemed appropriate to support the intention of these town centre allocations. I'm just rereading 4A and 4B as they're currently proposed to be drafted, and I don't see words of that nature there. It may simply be that you've considered that as a local planning authority, and you're going to advise me that you didn't think they were appropriate. Well, you may even have said it, but I've just overlooked where you've said it. There are a lot of words, as various other people have observed. So if you could pick that up when I come back to you. Is there anything else that needs to be said for 42 Leisure?
Not at the moment. I'd like to reserve just the
no, this is a complex site.
Thank you.
I won't cut you out completely. I'll come back to you if needs be. So, Dandara Limited, your perspective on this?
We obviously met in November and discussed this area of change at length. Our issue has always been about the requirement to master plan and the impacts on deliverability of the site and the delay to deliverability of the site. So we are therefore supportive of the changes that have been made by the council. We feel it's a very common sense approach to this site, and I think you'll recall when we discussed in the November session that it was recognised that the two sites are very different and they do have very different issues. When I say two sites, I mean obviously A and B, which we're now looking at. And I think, therefore, it is common sense that the council have now taken this view to look at a policy that's different. It addresses the issues that we have, and therefore we are supportive of that. The other comments that we want to make relate to some of the representations that 42 Leisure have made, and in particular the framework that has been appended. Do feel that 42 Leisure's representations really do demonstrate the need to split the sites into two. The document refers to over 10 years of discussions, including with the council. It also refers to the framework, which is now nearly 3 years old, which is obviously something that you've picked up on as well. It really does question the deliverability of this site over such a long period of time. Nothing has come to fruition. We're also in a situation where, I've just looked at figure 3 showing the freehold interests and counted up 7 or 8 different landowners in that area. If this site is truly deliverable and available, then where are the other landowners? Where are the representations? We've been told that the council are supportive of this framework. We've been told that there's a memorandum of understanding between the landowners, but there's absolutely no evidence to support that. We have no overall issue with that half of the site, or site 4B, coming forward for development, but our concern is that it should not delay development of the whole area, and in particular, obviously, our asset at Union House. Just to pick up on a point 42 Leisure just made in respect of the master plan, I think it's just to reiterate the point that over time we've not seen, other than 42 Leisure, we've not seen anything else from any other landowner. There's also reference to the inclusion of the car parks within the Montague Gardens element, and the need to change this because of the access road. There's obviously a legal agreement in place for that access, so we don't really feel that is necessarily supportive. We think it is particularly misleading to put in to sort of submit this framework, master plan framework, because it has had no consideration to other landowners, legal constraints, the village green position, which from our view only seemed to come to light to everyone at the November session. That obviously has been in place for many, many years. I don't understand why a document was prepared in 2011 or 2013 and shows development on the village green. I also think it's slightly naive to think that can be changed and swapped very, very quickly. We've obviously, before we purchased the site, we had QC advice on this matter, and we've decided that we won't be progressing development on those car parks at this point in time. The window of change for that obviously closes in 2020 for Village Green anyway, so we're only talking about 4 years, and it certainly isn't Dandara's objective to propose any development on those car park areas. I would also suggest that 42 Leisure need to check the boundary of the Village Green, because looking at the plans we've got, I think it's difficult to decipher whether that goes into some of their ownership themselves. Which is one issue. So we are concerned that a document is now sort of being presented that's not deliverable. It's got a number of constraints that really haven't been tested, and that one would expect to be tested during master planning. And we think there's significant issues really relating to deliverability and availability of that area. That's not to say that we're not supportive of wider development, because we are, but we want to ensure that obviously it doesn't impact on Union House coming forward. And I don't think there's any issue in 42 Leisure looking to prevent Union House coming forward, but we don't really want to be in a position where we have to go through a master plan exercise, which really we're talking about one major landowner and one other landowner out of a group of 8.
And essentially, yes, that you have this essentially other 6 landowners.
6, yeah.
Who essentially are not here.
And I think I refer back to what I said about at 2.1 in 42 Leisure's representations. It refers to a period of 10 years of discussions on this site with the council. We need to ensure that that certainly the bit that is deliverable, which is obviously Union House, isn't delayed by what is happening elsewhere.
I will return to 42 Leisure. Okay. Right. Well, let's do that now, because my next question to Dandara is a housing land supply question. So
just very briefly, it's not 8 separate ownerships. There are 8 separate parcels of land. But if you look at the list of the owners, all of the land to the rear of the properties in Montague Gardens are within the ownership of 3 owners, including the land to the front, which is 42 Leisure. So with the exception of plots 3 and 9 and 1, all of the other land is within the ownership of 3. The other 2 landowners who aren't here were perfectly happy with the plan as it stood and didn't make representations, which is why they're not at the table. But I have actually, and if the inspector feels it would be helpful to see, I have actually correspondence from both those landowners to me, which actually helped to inform the representation I made to the council to clarify the ownership in advance of today's hearing. So to say that they're not interested, and I think the other important point to make, yes, it has been 10 years, because the main obstacle to bringing this site forward was the British Steel Pension Fund intractable position with regards to Union House. When Union House came to the market, it was a surprise to everybody. 42 Leisure did make attempts to buy the site, or unsuccessful in their bid. But the reason that the slowness and the tardiness is not because of anything to do with the vision. It was an unwilling landowner who was not prepared to bring the site to the market. At that stage, it was felt it would not be available until about 2025. Okay.
Well, just as a kind of brief aside in relation to that contribution, I mean, clearly your representations to me are representations that I should give considerable weight to the retention of, at least the retention of the policy as it's currently formed, if not its expansion as a unitary area. I think it would be helpful to support your position if there is additional evidence of the engagement of landowners other than 42 Leisure. And of course we know Dandara's position, but the engagement of landowners other than 42 Leisure in the vision that you set out. Now, whether that's existing correspondence or even new correspondence, I mean, if I could have something, by the end of next week, is that going to be feasible? Okay. But now if I can return to Dandara, because we hadn't finished.
I'm slightly concerned that I'm not sure it's appropriate for 42 Leisure to be able to sort of go away and drum up business. If people wanted to make representations and they are happy, why haven't they done that?
I'm not asking them to drum up business. What I'm asking them to do is to evidence what they've just suggested to me, that they actually have a partnership greater in extent than their own interests. And if they have that, they do have an opportunity to support what.
But they had an opportunity to submit that with the statements that they made, if that's the case.
Yes, that's true.
Can I say that this sounds, you might find this an unbelievable excuse, but the main landowner is actually in the depths of Brazil at the moment. And I have an email from him in Brazil, which was sent to me to say that he was very happy for me to present to the inspector his willingness to participate in the plan. As I say, it's purely on the basis of them saying they support the plan. But I would reiterate the fact they haven't made representations is that they were aware that the site was in the plan. They didn't think that was to that.
They didn't view that as being kind of under threat, so to speak. I think I'm not going to attempt to deal with this in an extempore fashion. I'm going to allow Dandara to finish their chain of thought. I've got some questions to ask to Dandara. We then need to hear the Civic Society, and I then need to hear the Council. But somehow or other, whatever emerges from this discussion, we do need to bear in mind that at the foot of this there is a practical issue, which is that there are landowners who aren't here for whatever reason, and I'm not going to speculate about those reasons, who have, as far as they're aware, a plan that contains an area of change allocation that is in one part, not two, and we now have a proposal for two parts, and somehow or another a mechanism of actually drawing those people into this process, if the change that the council is proposing to make is to be made, needs to be brought about. Now, there's one way of doing it, and that's through the main mods process, which would be simple because it would be advertised, and then anybody could make their representations, and it may well be that that's the simplest and cleanest way of dealing with this issue, because people who are broadly supportive of the position that 42 Leisure have put would then have a perfectly clear opportunity to come back and say, no, actually, we like the plan as it was originally drafted. Thank you very much. And if they didn't, we would all know where we stand. Let's think on that as a procedural problem and deal with it after we've heard from the council. So coming back to Dandara, have you got any more that you need to say in principle in response to what you've heard from 42 Leisure, or can we go on and look at housing land supply?
We can. I just want to make a couple of points. It's not that landowners are not here today. This has been a long process. There's opportunity to make representations across a long period of time, including a simple email saying that you support proposal or you don't. The second thing is, and I don't really want to get into pedantics of counting up the landowners, but you can count for yourself the different landowners within those sections, and it is more than 3. But yeah, I'm happy to move on to.
Okay. Moving then on to housing land supply. I mean, were you here this morning?
No,
you weren't. You've probably though had a conversation with council about the contribution that Union House could potentially make to 5-year housing land supply. Because what they said in very, very potted summary this morning was that it was one of a small number of sites that they now believed were capable of delivering a significant number of additional units of housing within 5 years, and they would like to therefore add that into their 5-year housing land availability number, which would in turn mean that they have a 5-year housing land supply clearly demonstrated. Now, in terms of my own assessment of the virtue of that submission, given that you're here, the figure that was spoken of was 130 units within 5 years. Is that a figure that's been canvassed with Dandara, and is that a figure that you would...
Yeah, well, 130 is based on our current proposals, which are actually at 127, but I'm sure we can find 3 more units if we need to. So that's where that figure will have come from.
Okay.
And in terms of deliverability, it's within, I'd say, 3 years we would hope to have be completely off that site, really.
Mm. And one of the questions that I put to council in that session related to needing some additional evidence to support their position, which included, I mean, you know, it's very different from a typical broadacre or greenfield site that you've got a very large building on the site. I assume that its demolition is in itself an expensive and quite time-consuming exercise. So what I've asked them to do is to speak to yourselves about, you know, essentially what the processes are that will deliver 130 units, and so that they can provide me with an additional piece of evidence that is a breakdown of a programme for delivery of those units.
Okay, I'm not fully clear on what you're asking.
Well, what I would be asking them to do, and if it was going to make any sense at all, they would have to do it collaboratively with yourselves, would be essentially to set out a kind of year-by-year programme over 5 years that would say, you know, year 1, assume, obtain consent, year 2 to 3, demolish and prepare site, year 4, construct, year 5, construct and deliver to market, or whatever.
Yeah, well, we've obviously got the permitted development rights as well, which puts us in a position where we're comfortable and confident that we will be delivering residential development on that site, you know, probably within 2017. Our ideal approach is redevelopment of the site, because I think we all agree it's not a building that anyone wants to save. But we have to be mindful that we do have alternatives and the commercial reality of those alternatives. In terms of Dandara, we are a highly experienced apartment developer, so we've obviously looked at programme and deliverability well in advance of purchase, so that's not an issue to provide that information.
Okay. I just raised that because the nature of the conversation this morning was that then became a question that I asked. So some measure of conversation is going to need to happen between yourselves and the council, and therefore, I didn't want to leave this afternoon without having at least laid it on the table in front of you. Okay. Anything else that you need to add? Because I need to bring in the Civic Society. Thank you very much. Okay, to the Civic Society. Response to the proposed changes to the policy, but also to the policy as it was originally drafted, because we are examining them both.
Thank you, sir. We were comfortable with the policy as originally drafted, except for the general point that has been made earlier about things being so flexible that it became almost do what you like, chaps, and how you address this balance between allowing for different uses that might come forward and providing some firm guidance as to where hotels and other things might go. But we've covered that ground before. We are, I think, comfortable with a residential use on this site. We are very keen to see something better than the Union House that is there now. And we would like to see a master plan for the area as it is currently proposed as a single area of change that shows how the setting of the listed buildings on the Pantiles can be improved by a better Union House, and how the conservation area in which this area of change is wholly situated can be preserved and enhanced in the way that it should be. It is that area includes 4 pairs of villas down in Montacute Gardens, which are on our local list, which if it isn't in the library, it should be. It's in the public library. It's a list of buildings that we in the Civic Society and those in the Town Forum drew up a few years ago as being buildings that we thought added to the character of the conservation area. So the future of those 4 buildings would be one point that the master plan for that area, if it were to be, ought to address, as indeed it ought to address the question of trees and the general character of that area, which is quite an interesting little area. It also needs to address questions of how you move around the area from the Pantiles to the West Station beyond. As to the grand landmark, this is something that's been around for several years. We now learn, but as far as we're concerned, it only was something that we became aware of in the last day or two. And it hasn't been considered in detail by the Society. As I say, we favour a vision for the whole area, not necessarily that vision. I must say I do have some misgivings about this grand landmark myself, speaking personally really. Doubling the size of the Pantiles, for example, these famous walks were laid out in the 17th century, doubled in size, and presumably sloping downhill. I don't know. There's a big change in level from Union Square to the car park behind. I'm not sure how high the blocks are or what they would actually look like. Some of them look very near the avenue of lime trees, which I think is an important feature. So not necessarily that grand plan, but maybe the major landowner in the whole area, which is Dandara, ought to be the authors of the master plan rather than a minority interest. But be that as it may. So we do quite favour it remaining as a single area of change as it was, subject to a master plan that might be prepared by Dandara, and we talked about how master plans should be delivered. They could be drawn up by any of the parties who are interested in this land, and the council, under the arrangements that we talked about earlier in November, could adopt one or other of those, or indeed it could produce its own master plan if it didn't like what was proposed. So we've talked about master plans and how you manage to get a master plan that's going to be right for the area. As to splitting it in two, which is what is currently being put to you, I'm uneasy about aspects of that, not least looking at what is proposed for the Montacute Gardens area B. We see offices, hotel, leisure, residential. Quite how you reconcile those sort of... I can see a residential scheme being produced that made use of the villas that are there now and threaded skillfully in some new development, respecting the best of the trees and fitting in with the levels. Offices, hotel, leisure. It's again another of these random rag bags of uses that the council seems to throw into these areas of change and that don't really give very specific guidance. So I'm not at all convinced that this splitting of the site is anything other than something to help bring forward the redevelopment of Union House. Indeed, if it is to be split, I think it's perhaps questionable whether the B is an allocation at all. It's something that is very sylvan and quite interesting as it is, and into which some modest development could probably be added. But that's probably second best to thinking about the whole area properly, and that I think is more or less where we stand, unless my colleague Brian Lippard wants to add anything. We are necessarily doing all this very much off the top of our head. We've only learnt about this grandiose plan in the last day or two, and the splitting of the site. So it's something that has been very much sprung on this hearing. Do you want to add anything?
Mr. Lippard.
Thank you. Yes, very briefly. This is the type of example where we would look to the Borough Council to take one of the key areas near the Pantiles of the town, the historical aspect of it, the tourism, and get a grip on it and come forward with a plan that will excite the town and certainly hopefully excite us with a nice positive proposal. Okay, it can be delivered in phases, and we would expect it to be delivered in phases. We don't want a big bang approach because they don't tend to work. But getting things coming along, but knowing what the full picture is going to be, really we think the council should get a grasp on that and do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask the council to respond to everything that they've heard, and in so doing, draw my attention to the benefits as they see it of the subdivision of the policy as they currently propose, or alternatively to indicate that they've heard the results of their proposal and they're having second thoughts. I make no judgment, so let's hear from the Council.
Yes, thank you, sir. In relation to this area, we do recognise the importance of this area and its role as a gateway into the town. I think in coming up with these policies and the various iterations that there have been, we're sort of mindful of National Planning Policy Framework, paragraph 154, which says that local plans should be aspirational but realistic. So we have kind of wrestled with the balance between aspiration and realism, as particularly within the redrafting of this policy. But it is an area where, as you've heard today, there is strong developer interest in what is a brownfield and town centre site. So we would not wish to see anything that would hold back that interest, and with the potential for redevelopment of what is currently an unloved office building. So what we tried to do in the redrafting of the policies, as set out in our document PS42, is to allow these areas to come forward and not be constrained by the sort of pace of the slowest landowner. But we have included wording there saying in each of the separate halves, saying proposals for development shouldn't compromise the wider aims and development proposals of the other area. As regards your point about the council's role and land assembly, we did take on board your points as they were made in the November hearings, and our revised wording in Appendix 1 for the supporting text was intended to address that. So at paragraphs 3.35 and 3.36, we kind of set out the role we saw ourselves as fulfilling in terms of those areas, but we would be amenable to changes to that supporting text. As regards to the comments made by Dandara, we note their support and we welcome their support for the revised policies as set out within document PS42. I would say, as regards comments made by the Civic Society, there are other policies that would apply. It is, as has been mentioned, within the conservation area, and the revised urban design framework policy would also apply. In terms of points about seeking connections, the revised policy as written stresses the need to consider movement to the common and the pantiles and green infrastructure links. And it also stresses the need to provide public realm improvements as part of any redevelopment within the area. So we feel that covers the points that have been made. The division of this area into the two separate policies, we feel, strikes the right balance between aspiration and realism, as the National Planning Policy Framework asks us to do.
Thank you very much. Well, I mean, it appears to me, without returning to have the conversation yet again and go around everybody in the room, that there isn't going to be an outbreak of agreement on this point. One of the issues that I started to canvass with 42 Leisure and have heard the, in principle, concerns of Dandara Limited in respect of is this question of how to deal with the interests of those who are affected by the proposed change, but because they are not representals or because they didn't request to be heard, aren't here. Now, musing aloud somewhat, I did then give the view that if we were dealing with something that was a main modification, there would be a natural process that would involve the engagement of any such people without putting 42 Leisure to the need to go and procure emails from Brazil. So what I just wanted to test with the council, again, my in principle view is that a change of this nature is a main modification. And therefore, we are looking at something that's going to be advertised, etc. And if that's unless the council disagrees with me for very good reasons, if that's the way it's dealt with, then that's probably the best way of getting to this question of who's affected by it and what do they think.
Yes, so we would see this in those terms as a main modification to the plan.
Okay. Well, as I've said, in the wrap-up session at the end of this week, once we have a bundle of prospective main modifications, I will have a conversation with the council about timing and how a main mods process will be taken forward. Unless anybody wants to suggest to me that there's another way of dealing with and testing this proposal, that's probably as far as we can go. I, however, though, do have to give very careful consideration to the merit of the policy as originally advanced as against the council's proposed changes. And there's no escaping that because there's still loud disagreement on it. Civic Society want to have a final word? Is there anybody other than the Civic Society who wants to engage on this further before I close it? Dandara, 42 letters. Okay. Right, well, I'm going to come to the Civic Society first this time. Then I'm going to come to 42 Leisure and then to Dandara. Yes.
Simple question to you. So in view of your last comment, is it in your remit to rule that now, that it stays as one area of change?
I have to say to you, Mr. Lippard, that I think an extemporary finding by myself of that nature would be fairly unwise. To say nothing also of, potentially giving rise to what people who were adversely affected by that might characterise as procedural errors and actually use to challenge the adoption of the plan later on if we get that far. So I don't think it would be a useful intervention of mine to do that. No. Now, can we come to 42 Leisure?
Very, very, very briefly, I just wanted to clarify again the status of this document and why we submitted it at this stage. Our intention, our hope always was that there would be a master planning process that would engage with all of the interested parties. It wasn't for us to put one forward. We've shared it with the council, we've shared it with other landowners, including Dandara. And our intention, our hope was that under policy RTW4, that master planning process would take place and that this would contribute to that process.
Indeed. That's very simply articulated and understood. Okay. Moving then finally to Dandara Limited.
I think the revelation of the grand landmark into the public domain has sort of raised the issues that we have been questioning from the outset in terms of who prepares a plan, what does it mean. There's a number of different people here that have different views on these kind of documents, and that was our concern from the outset, that a master plan will result in delay in deliverability. What I do think from hearing the various comments that have been made is that I don't think there's a disagreement on the aspirations for the area, the need for future redevelopment, future investment. I don't think there's a disagreement on that. It's about the format that comes forward, and I think our view is very much that the policy wording of 4A and 4B are interlinked to make sure that they work together, and in particular for our site it is relatively constrained by things like the village green, by the fact that it's got PD rights, and I think that just because you split them into two doesn't mean to say that the whole area won't work as one to achieve those aspirations. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you very much. So, unless the council need to say anything else to me at all, I think we've reached the end of that agenda item. If we then move on, we have an item that I'd included merely as a kind of sweep up to make sure that things weren't forgotten. And that is the item that I referred to as other non-housing policies. Now, I'm conscious that I double-counted myself because I did include a bullet point in there on the content and application of the urban design framework, which we already separately covered, so we don't need to go there. However, what I wanted to make sure that we dealt with... actually, can I just ask 42 Leisure, can you just pop your Toblerone down? Thank you. What I wanted to make sure that we had a place to deal with were specific concerns about the quantum or yield of development from employment or retail policies in the town centre and Southborough, the soundness of individual policies and or the precise wording of individual policies before we get onto housing policies and or the housing content of area of change or joint policies. So, can I just see a show of Toblerones? Who wants to speak on these issues? Civic Society again, and apologies, we do have a water jug in the way. That's Caraway for Royal Victoria. Is that everybody? Now, what I would highlight as well, given the time, is that once we have dealt with this issue, the next two items on the agenda are main issue 3, which are housing policies, and we then go to main issue 5, which will be to hear any specific individual submissions on omission sites. Please include my site because. And so I just want particularly to get a feel for who also potentially wants to speak on those items so that I can get a feel for the programme for the rest of the afternoon. So if I can just look briefly then at main issue 3, housing policies, can I just see a quick show of Toblerones? If those who are going to speak on the non-housing policies can just pop theirs down for a minute. Toblerones for main issue 3. 1, 2, and Mr. Haskett. Okay. Are you debating where to involve yourself, Mr. Haskett? Can you just switch on the microphone? Yeah, thank you.
Sorry. I would prefer to deal with it on the basis of the submission that I've made.
In which case, what I'm going to suggest is the best place to hear you individually is probably in this next session, which is other non-housing policies, because once we get back into housing, we'll be very focused on housing. So can I suggest that you come in when we've heard Caraway and the Civic Society? I will then introduce you on this next agenda item.
Right, thank you.
Are you content? So I know who can we just see the Toblerones again for main issue 3? Housing, that's the Civic Society, Parkston and Oldie Stores. Right. And then finally, who wants to speak particularly to omissions sites? Is there anybody asking for new land? No. So that means agenda item 5 is going to be particularly brief. Knowing that, again, earlier than I had originally foreshadowed, but I think sensibly, in order to avoid chopping up the business of the remainder of the afternoon in a way that will disrupt people in mid-flow, I am going to suggest that we take a break now for 20 minutes, which takes us to just before 10 to. So let's say 10 to. 10 to 5, that is. And then we can return and we can deal with non-housing policies, Mr. Haskett's submission, and then housing policies, and that will be the end of the day. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. 10 to 5. Okay then, ladies and gentlemen, it is 10 to, at least by the clock on this computer, so we'll very shortly resume. Just before doing so, there was one little procedural matter that cropped into my mind whilst I was sitting in my room during the break, and that is in relation to tomorrow, where we've got site inspections in the afternoon. Just a quick reminder that the arrangements are that we will be on site in the Crane Valley at 2:20 p.m. and the meeting location is recorded on the website in document ID/10C. At the moment, the only attendees that we have recorded in Lynette's programme are the council themselves. Now, that's not quite as mad as it sounds, because I asked to visit that site myself. But is there anybody else? I did have this recall when I reviewed the programme that the CPRE had asked to attend. Before the end of today, can I ask you just to check in with Lynette, and then we can make arrangements to make sure that we either meet you here before we go so that you know what's happening, or alternatively we make a firm arrangement to meet you there at 2:20. Okay. Is there anybody else who's planning to be on that accompanied site inspection? No, apart from the council, obviously.
So on one of the notes, I had that a representative from Persimmon would be there, but...
Right. I'll speak to Ms. Duncan after the end of this session, and we'll just make sure that the necessary emails go out as well so that they're alerted. Okay. Let's move then back to the agenda. And just to remind you where we are, we're in that catch-all basket that I referred to in the agenda as other non-housing policies. What I'm bearing in mind the Toblerone exercise that we did just before the break, Mr. Haskett, would you be happy to go first, which would have the benefit for you of meaning that once you're done, and if you didn't want to stay for the rest of the session, you'd be perfectly at liberty to leave? Okay. The floor then is yours. There is your microphone.
First of all, the point that the objection which I have raised and supported by the Access Group is a quite simple one. We want to see the existing playing fields in Southborough retained as playing fields and not used for any other purpose. There is, if I may say so, a sort of touch of the deja vu's about all this, because this isn't the first time that the school playing field, which is a part of the site that is under threat at the moment, is not the first time they've been under threat. And it was some 25 years ago that the whole area was threatened with a very large development, supported, I may say, by Kent County Council. But there was a proposal then to have a massive development on the site, and that was then thrown out. And one of the reasons given by the inspector at the time for rejecting completely the proposals that were then on the table was the need for Southborough to retain its open space. And that, of course, meant the school playing fields as well as the other ground which the town council owns. So, as I say, there's a touch of the deja vu's about all this, because, interestingly, at that time when your predecessor gave his decision, the town council and the borough council both pronounced with great enthusiasm their delight at the results of the findings, you see, and specifically at the preservation of the open space in the centre of Southborough. In fact, the only space that can be used for sports and recreation activities within the town. So it's rather interesting and not to say a little ironic that both the town council and the borough council, inevitably I think supported by the county council, now want to sell off a substantial chunk, equivalent to probably about a couple of soccer pitches, from the Ridgeway playing fields for housing. Now, the reason they've given for this is that the money from this development is the only thing that will enable the redevelopment of the town centre, and without it, the football clubs wouldn't even get a new playing pavilion, a new sports pavilion, which they desperately need.
Can I just ask a question of fact of the council flowing out of this, which may help us, I think, get to the bottom of the issues that underlie your concern? Because I just want to understand, from my site inspection, part of proposed allocation ALSO2 lies within the area that is currently playing field. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Apologies, sir. I'm just trying to work out precisely which bit of land we're referring to. Perhaps if I could ask the council have we got the Southborough central area proposals map up on the wall? It's just there. It's just behind Mr. Haskett. Yes, if you could just go round.
the bit of land we're talking about is the former school playing fields.
Indeed. No, I'm aware of the large body of land, and essentially what I'm looking at is the boundary between ALSO3, which is allocated for recreation open space, and is the large area shown in the plan with a green stipple, and that's most of the playing fields. And then there's a section of the playing field which falls under the red notation for ALSO2. And it's that second bit, that section of the playing field immediately behind Crendon Park, and also looking at this from the London Road behind the theatre. Are we in the same place?
Yes, I think so.
We are. Okay. So again, the core of your concern is in relation to policy ALSO2 rather than 3. The reason I'm just testing this because your written statement which came in was headed as raising concerns about ALSO3, which is purely a recreation open space policy, and it is ALSO2, which is the Southborough hub policy, which includes the housing proposal. And I just wanted to make sure that we are talking about the same piece of land.
Yes, I think that's right.
Okay. So you're... Can we just have the microphone switched back on again? Sorry. Thank you very much.
There is no doubt that in my mind, that we need to preserve the whole of the existing open space for sports and recreation. If you look at the numbers, and you don't need to be a genius to work it out, one of the clubs which deals with the needs of young footballers from up to the age of 18 has some 500 members. Well, that's the equivalent of 45 football teams. Well, of course they won't all play at once, and you can spread it over a whole weekend and some evenings and so on. But nonetheless, you need every inch of that playing space if they are all to be given a reasonable opportunity to get the sort of exercise they need. And this is really what we're talking about. What this is all about is about the health and well-being of residents, and in particular of youngsters. You've probably all heard yesterday on the radio the problem of obesity amongst youngsters. Well, that applies just as much, I can assure you, in Southborough as anywhere else. And we've got to find a way of attracting those youngsters and keeping their interest in healthy sports activity. That is the core of it all. But having said that, I do recognise that, and the Access Group recognises that if the proposals to build housing on the equivalent of what is 2 playing fields, plus I think a road to join up with the rest of the highway system, if that were to go ahead, there would be considerable problems in providing the opportunities that youngsters actually need. One of my concerns about all this is there's been a good deal of misinformation. Now, I recognise fully that if the objection that I've raised is upheld, then money has got to be found from somewhere else. And I think there's been a lot of misinformation about this. I've asked the Borough Council Finance Department for answers to 3 questions, which I believe residents are entitled to have answers to, in order that they consider whether they're being treated reasonably.
Can I just interject at this point? Are you referring here to paragraph 4 of your submission, where you're talking about essentially receipts from sale of council houses and the like?
Sorry?
You're referring here to paragraph 4 of your submission, where you're talking about receipts from the sale of council houses.
I'm not quite sure. My difficulty is I can't read any of the papers. You'll understand.
Yes, no, I do. You had made a point. I mean, whoever produced this for you had summarised your view as being that essentially there was a substantial sum available from the sale of council houses.
Well, the 3 questions that I've put to the Finance Department were, first of all, how much of the money received from the sale of council houses by the Borough Council, which originally was about £32 million, how much of that has been reinvested, and how much is earmarked on what they call approved projects, and therefore what is left. So that was the first question. How much have they spent? How much of that has been spent in Southborough, which is a perfectly reasonable question to ask. And the third point is, how much of the money derived from the sale of Southborough's council housing is still available? Where is it?
Yeah.
You see that? And
the reason why
I've not had a specific reply to any of those.
And the reason why I guess you haven't had a specific reply, and the reason why I was interjecting at that point, is because it's not within my powers to make any recommendations to this council about how it spends its receipts from the sale of any assets. I just don't have that. There is no legal basis for me to make any such recommendation. What I have to consider is whether the plan should allocate land either for public open space or for housing in relation to the 2 allocations that we're looking at here, which is SO3, the open space allocation, and SO2, which is, it's not just a housing allocation, the hub allocation. And so what I was going to say, Mr. Haskett, is I take away from your submission a strong submission opposing the release of any further green space, any further playing field for built development in the centre of Southborough. You would like to see redevelopment of the existing developed land. Is that a reasonable summary of your position?
The reason we put in the second...
Can I just ask for the microphone to go back on again? Apologies. Don't worry.
Yes, I think that I quite understand your position. The reason we put in the second paper was to show that there is an alternative way forward, we believe, which would have far better results from the point of view of Southborough residents, and in particular far better results and far quicker results for people with disabilities. And that, if one can gain 2 or 3 years on behalf of disabled people and relieve them of the problems which they are currently suffering in Southborough, that I think is a worthwhile achievement. And that's again what the Access Group is saying. What we would be very happy to do is to sit down and actually talk these things through with both the borough, of which of course Southborough is a part. 1/10 of the borough's membership is in Southborough. We would like to sit down and talk to both of them through the whole project, and I'm pretty sure that as a result of that, we ought to be able to come to a much more sensible resolution of the problems rather than that which is being foisted on the town at the moment.
Okay. I think I've got a very clear understanding, Mr. Haskett, now of essentially what you're asking for, and obviously I've read your written material. At the outset, I did need to clarify this question about which allocation it related to, but that's now solved. I fully understand, I think, now what you're asking for. Can I just pass the questions that you've raised now over to the council for a response, and then we can hear their side of the story?
In terms of the allocation, I probably should make you aware that there is a current consultation now, which started yesterday it's called the Southborough Hub consultation,
right? Which
is a consultation which is running jointly with the three partners, Kent County Council, Southborough Town Council and Tunbridge Wells Borough Council, and they have consultants Pick Everard who are carrying that out, and that's running from the 30th of November to the 24th of January. We can provide you with the information in relation to that, but as part of that consultation, it does have some very useful general questions and answers, which sets out some of the issues that Mr. Haskett has asked about the playing pitches and things like that. So I would draw people's attention to that because that is quite a useful document. But just to clarify one point about the playing fields, in this document it does confirm that the loss of the playing field equates to 0.5 hectares. So that is what the loss will be of existing playing pitches. So it's not as much as what was referred to earlier on. And there is a commitment that the remaining playing area will be protected. And obviously that is protected through the allocation within the plan as well. So I think in terms of consultation, that's going to be a consultation widely with residents of Southborough, and I don't know what sort of consultation they may have already carried out with stakeholders, interested groups and bodies, but that's obviously something which is ongoing at the moment, and there's ample opportunity to get involved with that.
Can I just briefly check in relation to that consultation? Yes, it would be really useful if a copy of that consultation could be put into the examination library. So if that can be moved across the programme officer and then go onto the website, that would be good. Does the consultation raise any prospect of change to the developable area of the proposed allocation ALSO2?
It sets out two options for the development of the area, and they're kind of consulting on those two options. I think probably it's better to have a look at that information in more detail. It's obviously only became available yesterday.
Hand it over and Mr. Haskett can read it and I can read it.
Yeah.
Okay.
The consultation that you just referred to is on the limited options that the council have insisted on, including in the first instance developments on the Ridgeway playing field. There is no offer of consultation on what alternatives might be taken up, and that's what we want to see. meaningful discussions on the alternatives.
Can I just ask another question to the council then that will certainly assist me? When the hub proposal first arose in the context of the very early stage of developing issues and options for this plan, can you just summarise for me very briefly the engagement with the community in Southborough that happened at that point? In other words, has there been a consultation before the final stage of public involvement in the preparation of this plan that looked at options?
In terms of this site allocations plan, the policy was included in the 2013 version, and so there has been consultation at that stage, and also in the 2015 submission version. So we did further consultation at that stage as well. And the sort of Southborough hub proposals are the more detailed proposals are being sort of also consulted in tandem with this site allocations process.
So it's the council's view that kind of early stage in principle consultation, i.e. should there be any built development on playing fields, was something that has already occurred at the earliest of stages in the formation of this plan.
Well, I'm awfully sorry.
Excuse me, Mr. Haskett. Can I just let the council answer that question, and then I'll ask you for your response.
We certainly consulted on those proposals, and we did hold a consultation event in the Arc in Southborough, and we had a number of people coming in and raising the point about development on the playing fields. It's our views in the policy that is needed to facilitate the wider community benefits that the policy would bring about.
Okay, well, that's the council's view of the world. Mr. Haskett, you may not agree.
No, I'm sorry. I think that's a rather strange version of the truth. I've been to the last two town council meetings, and at both meetings there was grave reservations about what the councils were doing, and it was largely because the policies that they were developing in secret. There was no prior discussion of it, no early consultation amongst all the parties who might have a point of view. I mean, I know of some of the societies within Southborough that had no opportunity to make their point of view known. And I think it is, I'm afraid, simply untrue that there was adequate or indeed any consultation in the earlier stages. And what has been put to the Southborough people subsequently are the limited options which were the only ones that the Borough Council and the Town Council, as it's presently constituted, were prepared to offer. And that all relates to finance and so on, where the money's coming from. But I'm afraid there wasn't the consultation in proper form that there should have been. And I personally know that I didn't know half of what was going on at an early stage.
Thank you very much. I will take that submission into account. What I do have in the core documents for this plan in the examination library are a range of the documents that the council produced in their earlier stages of consultation. And I think, in fairness, what I need to do is to go back and review, given that this particular issue about early stage consultation has become a live one, I will just go back and have a look at what's on the public record and see what the council say they have done.
Can I just come back on one other point? I think it's slightly confusing because there's been our kind of statutory consultation process that we've carried out as part of the site allocations document. but there's also been another kind of separate consultation process specifically on this Ridgeway site. And so what we're referring to, the current consultation that's out, there was a previous consultation of some broad options back in 2013. And again, that was a separate consultation to our own site allocations consultation. And I think maybe that's where a slight confusion is.
Well, of completeness then, given that I've already got the statutory trail and I can review that myself, when you put in the new consultation with the detailed site options for the hub, if the predecessor document rather of 2013 is easily available, can that be put in as well?
It's referred to in Appendix 4 of Matter D,
right,
where we talk about the Southborough hub, and there is just a bit of information there in the appendix, but we can provide further information on that.
Okay. Drawing this together then, Mr. Haskett, I mean, I have all your written material. I understand the basis of your concern. I understand what you're asking for. I don't think you're going to persuade the council across this table to agree with you. So it will remain as a matter that I'm going to have to deliberate on and deal with in my report that I write to the council. And obviously in so doing, I will give consideration to documents that the council will provide to me that give me an understanding of the consultation processes that they say have occurred. I think we've probably reached a point where the pair of you have to agree to differ and leave it to me to make some consideration of it in my report. Are you content with that?
Oh, yes, completely content with that.
Thank you very much then, Mr. Haskett. And as I indicated before, unless you're particularly interested in the rest of the afternoon, you don't need to stay. Okay, so if we can then move on to the remaining non-housing implications of the Royal Tunbridge Wells and Southborough components of the plan. Now, I did ask for then a show of Toblerones, and so if those can go back up. Apologies, I still can't read that one. That's Caraway, Parkston, thank you very much, and the Civic Society. Okay, well let's start with Caraway.
Okay, so it's a very small point with regard to RTW 19, which is Royal Victoria Place, and it's really in reference to our reps that we submitted to the pre-submission document, and actually retracting from an element of it, which is we asked for Market Square to be deleted from the fourth bullet point. We were sort of shaping our proposal, our submission at that time on the proposals that we were developing, and sort of with further thought, we appreciate and understand that could, in the sort of lifetime of the plan, can be delivered as part of sort of to meet the comparison floor space. So we no longer sort of request that bit is deleted. The other elements are as we wrote, so I won't go into it now.
Fine. Okay, that's very simple. Any need for a response from the council? Probably not.
No, we're happy with that.
Okay. In which case, Parkston Limited.
Sir, perhaps you could advise me. I represent Hoopers, the store next to the hole in the ground, next to the Tunbridge Wells Central Station, and on which policy RT24 is proposed, which under Philip Whitbourne here, I'll use his phrase, has a random bag of users proposed for it, including some residential above ground floor. So and those uses include offices, hotel, leisure, and a multi-storey car park. And is this the right place, sir, to make? So bearing in mind that residential is probably a minor part of that development, am I in the right slot?
You are definitely in the right.
Good, sir. And then I can be brief. So I act for Parkstone, who own the Hooper store, so we made representations to delete the policy, and we're naturally pleased to read the Council's proposal to delete as a modification policy RTW24, which we see as eminently realistic and sensible. So you'll see in the Council's representations to you that the terms on which they are proposing this modification to delete the policy rest on paragraph 22 of the NPPF, on the basis that it is this proposed development is unlikely to come forward within the planned period. Whilst we welcome that, sir, and that was the conclusion to our representations to the Council to this proposal, we are a little frustrated that the Council has not referred whatsoever to the extensive representations we made to this proposal itself. And if I could perhaps draw your attention to these very, very briefly. So you will see that we made substantive representations on the highways and traffic issues and supported by a report, a highways assessment of ADL transport engineering in respect of the site access, parking, traffic flows, and the design of the multi-storey car park itself. So we took note of the advice of the Council's consultants, who are DSP planning and development viability consultants, that the prospect of the development as proposed on this site, or the range of uses, were poor to marginal, if not negative, and it is highly unlikely that a developer would consider such a redevelopment. And so we advised on the failure of any development proposal, barring ours, for 9 flatted units, to come forward on this site since the 1990s, and the Council's apparent failure to test the proposal and assess the marketability of it. So the Council's advised you that the landowners were approached. Their proposal suggested that there had been no developer interest and the site wasn't being promoted. And I'm intrigued, therefore, sir, by the Council's statement in para 17 of their latest document, that following further contact with landowners and due to some areas of the site no longer being promoted by landowners. Well, sir, it's always been our understanding that landowners have never been consulted, and certainly we haven't, and perhaps until recently. So therefore, sir, we support the Council's proposed modification to delete proposal RT24 and to consider any proposals for redevelopment on any of this land on their merits and with regard to extant policies at that time. So we did make representations also on RT29 in terms of the continuing proposal to incorporate the land running up to up Grove Hill Road on the right-hand side from the roundabout with Mount Pleasant up to the Black Pig or beyond as primary retail frontage, sir, on the basis that clearly in our regard and in terms of our market agents, it is clearly tertiary. And also the Council's view in a recent pre-application informal that in terms of our, so which is before you, that our scheme for 9 apartments on the site of 8 to 16 Grove Hill Road didn't need a retail frontage at ground floor. So we're committed to the view that this isn't primary retail frontage, and we make representations accordingly to the impending local plan review. But, sir, it would be interesting to see if the Council do have any views on the representations we made, because we haven't had any to date. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In a nutshell, though, because there is a distinction in my mind between a process of ongoing dialogue between yourselves and the Council that may not have been as good as you would have liked, or may not have happened at all in your submission, and the information that I need in order to be able to make recommendations on the plan. Looking at it through that second telescope, the council's current proposal is to delete the policy that concerned you. Is there anything else you want included in the plan as distinct from satisfaction in terms of their engagement with you on the background issues? Because if you're happy with the plan as the council propose it to be now, there's probably not a great deal more that I can realistically do for you other than consider whether or not that policy ought to be deleted.
Yes, sir. We are content with the proposal to modify and to delete the plan and to delete this policy.
Okay. I'll turn to the council for a response. And it may well be that you need to have some offline conversations to deal with some of the background stuff.
I understand, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Tofts.
Yes, I note the representations put forward. We have deleted it and would support the comments just made about the policy. We will consider issues of primary shopping frontage, etc., as part of the local plan review, and no doubt we will have representations on that as part of the review.
Okay. I will give very careful consideration then to the council's proposal as it currently stands, which is delete the policy. Now then, if that concludes Parkston, we then have the Civic Society. Mr. Lippard, is this your...
Yes, me again. Thank you. Relating particularly now to employment, to start with. In the original site allocation document, para 323, it will say core policy 9, developing the core strategy, states that the existing amount of employment floor space in the key employment areas, including the town centre, will be maintained for the planned period. Additional floor space will be provided where this is necessary to provide a higher quality of space to attract higher value jobs. Since November the 11th, and if we now go to the Eridge Road area of change, ALRTW4, right at the beginning it says, within this area, a comprehensive scheme for redevelopment and refurbishment of sites, buildings, and first one, proposals will be expected to deliver the following: employment use. Opportunities should be explored to re-provide floor space for employment, which could include office or hotel and conference later on. We hear today that Union Square will not be providing any employment whatsoever. Attention was drawn to me in the Inspector's Matters, the Council document, Matter D, Inspector's Matters, main issue 2, areas of change. At the foot of page 6 is mentioned that Merivale House, approval for prior notification for the change of 2 floors from office to residential use. Vale House, similarly, property from office to residential use. Indications of employment going. I haven't heard any indication of how the council are proposing to maintain or even increase. And this comes back to a reiteration of the general points that I'm sure I bored you with at the November the 11th, where we feel the whole document is, because the lack of this town centre area action plan, we have no indication from the council as to how many hotels does it want, if any. Are we majoring on conference centres or aren't we? Do we actually need them? And the employment seemed to be very much purely on the basis of, well, wing and a prayer, and let's hope it'll happen. And we're demonstrating already that employment uses are going down, and I haven't heard any indication that they will come up. I have then got a specific point about one of the areas, and later on, I don't know if this will be the right time to raise the primary, secondary shopping area, because I'm not sure it will appear on the agenda later on.
It won't appear later, so absolutely get it nailed down now, because once we've finished non-housing policies, we will then go into main issue 3 housing policies, and then essentially we pass out of Royal Tunbridge Wells and Southborough into other settlements in the rural area of the borough. So,
would you like me to carry on with the other issues, or would you like the council to respond to the more general nature of the question I posed?
I suspect it's probably best if you get the whole story out, and then they can pick everything up in one hit. Although that being said, I do note that Dandara have flagged their interest in speaking. Can I just check, is this directly in relation to the employment point that has just been made?
Yeah, it's just a really minor point. Just to clarify, our redevelopment proposals do include some office space. It is a really small amount, and it is anticipated to be Dandara's own office in the future. But I just wanted to make it clear that there is some office space in there, not none.
Okay.
But it does mean we're here to stay. So
Noted. Noted. But useful to have dealt with that now. Mr. Lippard, please continue with the remainder of the Civic Society's position on non-housing policies.
An issue that relates specifically to policy RTW 13, which is the current Turner's site, where the plan indicates turning it into residential. Now, I and one of the local councillors have both submitted to you that part of this would be beneficial if we could have some employment, particularly small little engineering type developments there, because you have the Showfields housing area, which has very few employment opportunities, whereas the proposal at North Farm to put this type of employment opportunity is there, and that would meet the housing, Gregswood and Sherwood, who would then be within easy walking distance of that. But we would submit that consideration should be given to having a similar area, albeit maybe a small one, on that particular site. Now, I know there's a representative here from ABP Foods who commented on this, and as I understand it, they're saying, no, it's quite clearly that the core policy says that it's residential. I would submit that, having read the core policy, it is perfectly in order for employment to be put onto this site, and I would be looking you to make that statement. Whether in the end employment is or isn't on that site is a totally different issue for when the planning application comes in. But we feel that the policy should enable that to be the case.
That's a clear submission. Now, I do note that moves directly in terms of pushing against the position that ABP Food wished to put, that we were going to deal with in main issue 3 as a housing policy issues matter. Now, what I can either do, sir, is I can allow you to interject now and we can essentially deal with half of your issues now, or alternatively, I can ask the Civic Society to hold that point and we can actually have the ALRTW discussion all together in one hit under the next agenda item. I think it would make more sense to do that.
I'd agree entirely, Inspector, yes.
Okay.
I'm happy with that.
Okay. In which case, I'm going to put to the council the
I've still got the third item.
Not so easy.
You told me I'd lose it if I didn't mention it. The issue of primary and secondary shopping areas. still say that the national planning guidelines insist that a council should designate primary and secondary shopping areas. The council have again come back and indicated they only wish, prepared whatever, to do primary at the moment. We feel you've got to rule and say they must do primary and secondary designations, even if when they do the local plan they happen to change it.
Okay, again, that's a very clear position. So I'm now going to pass across to the council for a response.
Yes, so perhaps if I give a very brief response, I don't wish to reiterate a lot of the points we made in November sessions.
Indeed.
But, it was our view, which we put across then, which no doubt you're considering, that the generality of policies within the town centre would also contribute to employment uses. And one of the areas of homework arising from that session was for us to go away and to consider how that might be monitored for kind of revisions in the future. And so I would refer you to our document, PS 26A, I think it is, where we set out proposals for monitoring that as part of a comprehensive approach to town centre uses in the future. As regards primary and secondary shopping streets, we don't propose to designate secondary shopping streets as part of this site allocations development plan document. It is something we will look at as part of a local plan review, where we feel there's more of an opportunity to consider new evidence on retail and shopping and to consider the area comprehensively. A number of points were made in November, specifically about Camden Road, for example, and we feel the entirety of the town centre should be looked at holistically in one go, really, which we believe is more appropriate for the local plan review. So in that terms, we don't want to add anything more here than what we said at the November sessions or is set out in our matters A to C.
Those matters, as you say, have already been through the mill. I've already received a documented position. Essentially, I've got to write a report and consider those. So what I'm going to suggest then for the Civic Society is that I take those away. And as I indicated in November, there are matters in which you are not able to reach agreement with the council. That's perfectly normal, and I've just got to go away and do the hard work. Does that bring us then to the end of the non-housing policy dimensions of the Royal Tunbridge Wells and Southborough section of the plan? I believe it does. In which case then, we are now on main issue 3, housing policies, inclusive of course of sites where housing is a significant component. And given that there are no remaining items for discussion on main issue 5, when we reach the end of this, we're done. So, can we just remind ourselves who needs to be involved in this discussion? It's Aldi Stores, ABP Foods, the Civic Society. Is that everybody? Okay, now I guess this is going to go very much on a kind of site-by-site and individual interest-by-individual interest basis. I think probably the best place to start, given that we've already got a toe in the water, is with ABP Foods. And they can set out their stall, and then we can introduce the Civic Society on that point. Can I just check with the Civic Society, are there other points that you need to make other than the engagement in that site?
No, simply that one.
Okay, great. Let's do that. And then apologies, Aldi. You've waited a long time, but we will come to you in the end. So, for ABP Food Group.
Thank you, Inspector. I really don't have a whole lot to say other than to say that ABP supports the policy provision RTW 13 in its entirety, with the exception of one small amendment, which we would seek in relation to bullet point number 1, where it relates to green infrastructure links and says shall be provided, including pedestrian links between Broadwater Lane and Linden Gardens, and ABP would prefer the word provided to be replaced with the word investigated. Other than that, ABP is entirely satisfied with that policy and supports the views of the Council.
Okay. Now, before I open this up and draw in the civic society, in terms of the basis for your concern, you're viewing shall be provided as being essentially too imperative, that it places you under an obligation to provide green infrastructure links. Is that the core of your...
There's no objection. As planners, I think we're all in favour of permeability and linkages, and particularly in pedestrian linkages and so on. Our feeling is that it requires more detailed investigation, maybe through the development management process. I'm not entirely sure as to the purpose and function of the link, other than it is providing a link. And that I think might be better dealt with at the development management stage.
Okay. Right, let's hear the civic society on the retained employment dimension of this policy, as you see it.
Okay. In ABP Food's response, it mentions first such a request to have employment would require an amendment to the core strategy, which is not the purpose and beyond the remit of the present consultation. When I read the Core Policy 7 employment provision, there it says, where it would be, Royal Tunbridge Wells Town Centre brackets boundary to be defined within the TCAAP. Well, as the Council haven't defined a TCAAP, I think this site falls within the Tunbridge Wells Town Centre. Ergo, it can be considered for employment.
Which gets back to your overarching position, which I'm already considering and which I heard you in November, namely that thought needs to be given to better means of identifying existing employment land, protecting employment uses and bringing forward the employment uses that the Council wishes to see delivered in order to deliver its overarching strategy. In summary.
Absolutely correct.
Okay. In terms, though, of the specifics of this site, are there any particular issues about its location in relation to the town centre and surrounding residential areas, and also possibly limitations about access that might make a set of future employment uses on this site maybe a little more difficult or challenging than they might be on some other sites? My observation there is made only because when I did my site inspection, one of the things that struck me immediately was there's a very low railway bridge on the main access into the site for large vehicles, and then the surrounding land is essentially residential in nature. So if large vehicles aren't coming in via the route that's constrained by the railway, they're actually trying to work their way through residential, already developed and occupied residential areas that are quite traditionally such. So if there's a distinction between the way you would deal with land of that nature that's already in an employment use that's planned to continue, but if there's a suggestion about its comprehensive redevelopment, whether it's necessarily a good site for future employment is another another matter. So I thought I'd just explore that with you.
Well, at the moment, you're getting big articulated lorries going into Turners. What the local council and I are talking about are small engineering type works, where I think if you had a white van, that'd be about your limit. So I really wouldn't see that as an issue. If anything, if you're going to mention traffic, there are more likely to be issues with lots of residential cars trying to join the road under the railway bridge than it would be with a few vans. So you might wish to ask the council, what would they do with the road infrastructure if they put a whole load of houses in there?
I will. But, in fairness, I think we need to allow ABP just to respond to your position.
Thank you, Inspector. It is the view of ABP that the site is entirely suited as a brownfield residential redevelopment site. It's in proximity to the town. It's approximately 1.2 miles from the centre of the town. There are clearly footpaths, there is public lighting, there are community facilities in the area. The pattern of surrounding development is indeed residential. The site itself is increasingly unsuitable as an industrial site. You have visited the site. I have visited the site. We see the difficulties with it in terms of there must be near 100% site coverage on it as it stands at the moment. There are difficulties in terms of storage, truck manoeuvring on the streets, car parking, employee car parking, and so on. It's a constant difficulty. From a planning and sustainable development point of view, we strongly contend that it is entirely suited as a site for redevelopment for residential purposes.
Okay, and just two consequential questions to you flowing out of Mr. Liphart's submission that we've just heard. Firstly, have you given consideration to the amount of traffic that will be generated and its ability to access the site for residential use? And would you view that as a potential constraint at all?
There has not been detailed traffic studies done in relation to it. Again, we believe that is a matter for the development management stage of the process. But there is clearly large vehicles and significant numbers of vehicles accessing the site from the A26 and that particular junction.
Okay, and then finally, would, in your view, the sort of employment vision that Mr. Liphart's set out, which is not a large floor space manufacturing employment future, but maybe a knowledge intensive industry workshop sort of B1 type floor space use?
Without sight of the particular proposals, it's very difficult to say. Knowledge intensive uses of themselves can generate very high traffic volumes. Engineering type works, small as they may be, and I think I can understand where the civic society is coming from. It's a nice idea. Not in this particular location. It sort of, in my mind, creates the idea of people operating with small premises, a lot of noise, use of machinery, operating late at night, vans coming and going. It could be steel being delivered, could be fabrication, noise, there's odours, there's traffic, and there's small floor plate across the whole of the site or even on part of the site in itself, I think, can generate significant disamenities for what is essentially now a residential area. And as I say at the beginning, high knowledge based floor plates per square metre occupancy can be very high as well.
Okay. I'm going to ask the council to respond briefly to what you've just heard from those two representatives.
Yes, thank you, sir. In terms of the point about green infrastructure links, it was our intention in drafting that policy to provide through routes to the town and the town centre to improve general permeability, really. And I think it is looking at my plan, I think it's Linden Gardens there that ends in a sort of full stop almost when it hits the site. So that was our intention in drawing up that first bullet point, and the wording expressed as shall is a common one we've used throughout policies in the draft site allocations development plan document. So it was to get that sort of common approach across the policies. But I don't know if you've visited the site and seen it from that approach.
I have, and I did actually very deliberately go not just to Broadwater Lane, but I then drove round the back. Linden Gardens itself is actually a private road, so I didn't drive that. But there's a road that comes in from the north with a bollarded end, the name of which is eluding me at the moment because it's usefully cut in half by the proposals map, and I'm referring to the section that's actually on the wider town map, which I'm just trying to turn up. And I think, no, there's an intervening map between the Greenbelt and Rural Fringe proposals map and the town centre map. We'll get there. Hawkhurst, Gills Green. And there's a Sod's Law factor, which it'll be at the bottom of my pile. Here we go. It's the Royal Tunbridge Wells and Southborough. Broadwater Rise. So Broadwater Rise comes down, is terminated by bollards. There's pedestrian access. It forms what would be a T-junction if there was a junction with Linden, which kind of has an unfinished end, for want of a better description, moving directly into the site. And it's your ambition to create essentially a through link through the site at that point.
Yes, so that was our sort of general intention in drafting the policies, and that was why we used the word shall there in common with other policies. But perhaps to borrow your phrase from earlier hearing sessions, it's one for the umpire's basket, that one.
Okay. I will come back. ABP have got a comment on that, but do complete your point.
Just to say, in general terms, about the highways access, etc., this proposal has formed part of the plan through several iterations, and we've consulted with Kent County Council's Highways Authority on the plan, and we've had no constraints highlighted to us in terms of the highways access for it as proposed. So, we've no reason to believe that there are highways constraints on this site.
Okay. If I can go back to ABP briefly, and in so doing, can I just ask whether there are any particular legal constraints that you're aware of that would inhibit your ability to address that first bullet point in the proposed policy?
You've answered the query I was going to raise. We don't know, and that is the difficulty with using the words shall in that policy. It could undo everything if you're in a position where you have a policy base that requires you to do something and you legally can't do it.
Mm. Because I am conscious, of course, that Linden Gardens is a private road. So I didn't drive down it, and I felt a little unsure about whether I was even allowed to walk down it, but I did anyway. But if it's not a public right of way or a highway, there is an in principle question.
If these constraints exist, then we will be happy with an alteration to that wording to say, shall be investigated, perhaps. But
yeah, I would. Can I leave that as a minor homework item for the council, which is just to check what the implications of the current legal status of Linden actually is. And if it's perfectly lawful for members of the public to pass up and down it, and therefore it can be connected onto a footpath or a cycleway in the site, then the policy is perfectly reasonable, perfectly deliverable, it would appear, as it is. The dilemma is ABP don't know, and I can fully see that in circumstances where it isn't known, they might be a little worried about a policy that compels them to do something that couldn't be achieved.
Yes, certainly so. We'll look into that in more detail.
In which case, have we reached the end of that section? No, not quite.
2 points just to make there. One, going back to the points the council just made about no problems with the traffic access. I would like to suggest or think that maybe that was done before Aldi were having a proposal. And in fact, where the Aldi store will join the Erridge Road is not very far from where residential would join the Erridge Road as well, directly under that railway bridge. So I would ask you to ask the council that they should consider both the proposals at the same time, because you can't keep adding traffic onto Erridge Road without there being a problem.
Noted, but I think we are in a world where if the Highway Authority had problems, they are big enough and bold enough to identify those and put them in. I'm a little bit chary about going on what I would call a problematic fishing trip, looking for problems unless the relevant statutory organisation actually comes forward and says, think.
Okay, it's your choice. The second one, it's pointed out to me, if there was employment use of the site, it would be B1, light industrial and office. So the issues about noise, etc., shouldn't be a problem if that is enforced.
Well, I did refer to B1 when I put the matter to ABP. Again, you're not going to agree. I think it's in the umpire's basket. By my reckoning, ladies and gentlemen, we only now have one remaining very tired, probably terminally bored representative who needs to put her point. Can I ask Aldi Stores to introduce themselves, please?
Right. I'm not going to be long. Just in relation to the plant tool hire site on Erridge Road, this one, the RTW6 allocation. Just really want to register our support to the changes to the policy wording on behalf of Aldi. As we set out in our representation, the original allocation of Erridge Road for housing only is not reflective of the current land ownership, site inclusion in the town centre, commercial history and advanced discussions between the council and the commercial developer. and the site should form part of the commercial town centre area in which retail or employment development is acceptable. The extension of uses will allow for greater flexibility at the site and will support Aldi in delivering a beneficial food store development in the near future. We therefore support the Council's extension to the policy wording to the effect that the site is suitable for a range of uses to include residential and or A1 retail and or employment uses. That's all.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else want to speak on that matter? Well. Nobody does. So a response from the Council then, if one is required.
Just to agree with that last comment and thank the respondent for their support.
Well, it only remains for me to apologise for the inordinately long time that you've had to sit at this table merely to say those few very brief words, but sadly that's how the agenda was structured and therefore how the order of business ran. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much for participating. I take it, therefore, that we can draw Royal Tunbridge Wells and Southborough business to a close, which means that when we return tomorrow morning at 10, we can move on to Matter E and the rural fringe / greenbelt dimensions of the plan and commence with Knight's Wood. And just to remind everybody again, no sitting tomorrow afternoon. We finish at 1 and we reconvene on site at 2:20 p.m. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.